Important context. I live in the summer house of my family home. It is essentially my bedroom. I love every second of it. Never leave the house after midnight if you must. Do not make a sound, especially no singing, music, humming, jingling of keys, or talking. Never forget to lock up. The shed may be open, shut it, and don't look inside. Lights will flicker when you turn them off. Do not leave the room until the flickering has stopped. If you see a person in the corner of your eye, look at it directly in the eyes and wait until it disappears. If you see a man hanging in the living room, leave, shut the door, lock up, and go for a walk. He should be gone when you get back. Never leave a candle burning, not even for a second while you use the bathroom. If it can burn, it will. When you get halfway up the garden, look at the moon. If it's full or waxing, you're safe. Anything else, refer to Rule 8. If anything goes wrong, run to the summer house, lock the door, without jingling the keys, they hate that noise, and close all blinds, put a film on, and watch its entirety. Fall asleep with the video on. It will be switched off at the plug by morning. Ignore this, that means you pleased them. The fridge is never to be turned on nor opened, either will attract them. Refer to Rule 8 if you can. If there is a light on in the house, go inside and turn it off. Refer to Rule 3. You will need to drink during the night. Your throat will be scratchy and dry. Only carbonated beverages are to be drank after 12. Any open containers will become dangerous after 11 p.m. Ensure all lids are firmly screwed on. Moths and spiders will appear around 1 a.m. Catch and release every single one. Do not fall asleep until you do this. Take the pills with your name on it. Make sure your name is spelt correctly. If it is not, throw them over your left shoulder. You may see graffiti on the sides of the house. The hooded figure drawing it is not friendly, and it must not see you under any circumstance. If it does, climb underneath the storage unit and close your eyes. If you're lucky, it won't remember where you were. If you wake up between 2 to 4 a.m., do not open your eyes. Do not open your eyes. If you fell asleep with a night mask on, do not trust it. If you feel nauseous, light a candle. If it goes out on its own, go back to sleep. If the bin is full, start a new one. If the place is not clean, it will attract them. Do not eat anything in this room. It will taste like mold, and it will make you bedridden for upwards of a week, rendering you unable to complete these rules. There have been 3 suicides, 2 murders, and 5 deaths in this house, and the previous tenants do not recall ever living here. Document all rules and all sightings, and pray the next tenants listen. A few months ago, I made a mistake. I broke Rule 17. I always set an alarm for 7 a.m. to make sure that I don't open my eyes before then, but this fateful night I had convinced myself that I simply snoozed my alarm and I opened my eyes. My breath quickly became shallow and labored. I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking that this is the end. I screwed up. I broke a rule. This is it. My eyes adjusted to the darkness to find a bucket on my chest. It was filling with an off-green colored fluid, dripping in from somewhere. The dripping slowed nearly to a stop, and my eyes adjusted to a semi-normal level of vision. I glance up at the ceiling, and my eyes become glued to the creature. A mass of dead flies, moths, and spiders. The ooze dripping from its protruding hip bone directly into the bucket. It crudely resembles a young child with no facial features but what appears to be a complete skeleton. I blink hard, hoping that this was just another one of those figures you can stare at until they disappear. It was not. It lunged at me and picked up its bucket. I could finally breathe. It picks up an amount of the sludge and applies it like a moisturizer on its body, regenerating the areas where its skeleton was on show. Its legs were stuck to the ceiling, its upper body hanging upside down from the ceiling. I needed to get rid of it. It was toying with me, and has regenerative abilities. There was no way I could possibly outsmart it. I shut my eyes as tightly as possible as it replaced its bucket on my chest, and I hear that nauseating dripping noise again. As my chest grows heavier, I somehow fall asleep. I'm not religious, but the day after I thanked every god I could think of. I had woken up, and I was seemingly unharmed, other than a cracked rib. I told my parents, and they smiled. "They must like you," my dad said nonchalantly. I didn't feel lucky. I didn't feel much at all. Of course I was grateful. Anyone would be. But why didn't they kill me? Why did they choose to save me? Am I more valuable alive to them? I don't think I'll ever find out. I'm hoping to move out soon. The previous tenants have been sectioned under the Mental Health Act recently. Apparently suffering from paranoia, they sent us a cease and desist order after we asked them how long they lived here. According to the landlord's bank, all of their checks never existed. There is no evidence they ever were here, even though they left family photos in a box in the attic, and the landlord still has the money. My parents act like this is normal. They don't seem concerned at all. My brother seems unbothered. There's something off with them. I hope my summer house keeps me sane. Edit. This next part was written in the original post, apparently by me. A commenter alerted me to it, so big kudos to them, but what the hell? But I can't help but feel this is the only good way to live. Maybe I should join them in the house. Maybe you should join us too. The house knows best. They know best. For the sake of simplicity, I will henceforth refer to this series of events as Ghosts in the Closet. A slightly humorous name my friend suggested. That's a bit less wordy. I've been leaving updates in the comments, but I think this needs a post of its own, so here goes. I uncovered a journal in the attic, underneath the family photos. It seems to have 3 distinctly different handwritings in it, and so I can only assume that a minimum of 3 people have written in it. The first page contained the list of rules, missing a few, and a journal entry that reads as follows. Dear Diary, we've only recently moved to this house, but already things seem amiss. I have never suffered hallucinations, nor have I taken any illicit substances, but shadow-like humanoids seem to persistently appear in my vision. I've recently invested in a camcorder, or a camera, as the youths are calling it. I've got little storage on it, but the photos I have taken appear completely normal, as if nothing were there, even when I can see these creatures. I'm starting to wonder if I have perhaps become hysterical. My beau has come to visit me, in fear I may be admitted. He has so far appeared normal, although alarmingly calm above the situation. My dearest mother has recently come to depart, and of course I am mourning her deeply. I fear that my hysteria may stem from her recent passing, although these apparitions have been present much longer. My beau has only bore witness to the self-extinguishing of candles, and the arachnids. I must get to my chamber. It is far too late to be unsleeping. I found this odd. According to the building records, this house has only been around for 30 years, and the English used seems to be from a much earlier time period. I do, however, believe I may have found the source of the hanged man. The journal entry reads as follows. Dear Diary, my heart breaks today as I mourn another loss, my dearest beau. He was found today having passed away at his own hand. The nurses and doctors claim he passed peacefully, but how could one pass peacefully while hanging? And despite my anger, I cannot begin to imagine the pain my dearest sweetheart felt. I do hope his soul is resting in heaven above, despite committing the gravest sin. I would never had suspected he be the type to do such a thing. He had never even appeared distressed. He was full of joy and contentment. He was truly a good man, and lived his life in a way our great Lord would approve of, regardless of his manner of passing. I am having a priest come to bless this house. Lord knows it direly needs it. Again, it is late. I must not journal so late into the night. I have an odd feeling that this may be the hanged man in my living room. He appears to be the most peaceful, only requiring a walk, which is often good for my mental health. The next entry appears to be a lot more recent and reads as follows. Holy shit! This place is haunted with a capital HAUNTED. I need to get some paranormal investigators in here. They'd have a blast. I keep seeing these spooky bitches. My old man says I'm crazy, but I swear down something's off here. I'm trying to be funny about it, but it's scary shit. I seriously think my rents have lost it. They're robotic and zombie-like. Sorry about writing in your diary, old lady. Please don't haunt me. I think your boyfriend was killed. Suicides don't tend to stick around. If my ghost hunting shows tell the truth. I wouldn't put it past this creepy place. Anywho, peace out, I've got spiders to catch. There's a lot more in this journal, but I feel like these are the three most relevant. There seems to almost be a deep dive into every ghost in this journal. No word on the spiders yet, or the kid. I took some advice from you guys and spoke to my neighbors. The one side has moved out silently, so I knocked on an empty house's door for half an hour. The other side seemed a lot like my parents, almost brainwashed. They mentioned briefly some specific rules, but I couldn't really tell if they were talking about bedroom cleaning or a how-to on living. Either way, they were eerily similar to my parents. I spoke to a young man, who I assume is their son. He agreed with me that since they've moved in, his parents have changed a lot. His words were verbatim, "They're like an eye, pre-programmed and cold." He seemed upset, as though he were grieving his parents' previous selves. I've arranged to talk to him on Saturday at a local coffee shop. He said he would see what he could get out of his parents. In the meantime, we've had a pretty concerning development. I needed to grab a book from my house. I had an essay due for collage in the morning and had to go into my living room. There, I saw the hanging man, which for once was the least of my concerns. My father was sat on the sofa talking to it, but not in a language I understood. My father only knows English and BSL, and has never shown any interest in learning another language. I tried to speak to him, but he didn't respond. He's deaf, so this isn't abnormal, but even when I was signing directly in front of him, he ignored me. He was almost looking through me. It looked as if the apparition was giving him instructions. I tried to touch the hanged man, but my hand went through him. He didn't seem bothered. He seems docile, at the very least. My dad began to cry, almost moved by what this man had told him. Moments later, my dad walked out of the room and spoke to me, more robotic than ever, but with a look in his eyes that I can only describe as a cry for help. From that day onwards, my dad was much more strict about the rules and following them to the letter. He seemed to have received a warning from the hanged man. A few days afterwards, I found an entry in the diary, in my dad's handwriting, which sent a chill down my spine. My dad didn't know about this journal. He had no way of knowing, but this entry was definitely his, and explained precisely what had happened with the hanged man. It reads as follows. I spoke to one of the things in my house today, and something snapped in me. This house is so much more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. The situation keeps getting weirder and weirder. I thought the crazy was contained to my house, but apparently not. As some of you have seen, on my last post, some very out-of-character things were said by me along the lines of "join us." I have no idea who "us" consists of, but I'm aiming to find out. Also, to answer a question many people were asking. To avoid opening my eyes between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., I set an alarm for 7 a.m., and if it hasn't gone off, I assume it's too early. It's pretty easy to develop a habit of waking up without opening your eyes, although it takes a lot of consistency. As always, I will keep you all updated. Thank you for the kind words and advice. Please know I have taken everything on board, and will be shortly trying some suggestions. feel obliged to give this place 0 out of 5 stars. This is by far the worst Airbnb my boyfriend and I have ever stayed at. Our room was on the 5th floor of a drab tenement on the outskirts of Pyongyang. The building itself looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the late 80s. When we got inside the flickering hallway lights, an unexplained hospital smell did not prove inviting. There was no elevator, and we had to drag all of our luggage up the steep and narrow stairwell. The walls were lined with a dozen portraits of Kim Jong-un in various poses doing dental work in the open mouths of enraptured Koreans. We had to squeeze into our room. It barely contained enough square footage to fit a bed, a desk, a shelf, and an old dresser. Oddly, it was vertically quite roomy, with the ceiling above us 2.5 stories overhead. There were no windows, and the only source of light was an exposed bulb in the corner of the roof. It was too bright to look at directly, but not bright enough to read by. The bed sheets looked, felt, and smelled like old cheesecloth. There were 2 pillows. One was too large for anyone to comfortably rest upon, while the other was a flaccid, empty sack. On the wall was a black and white poster of executed Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu. There was a jar on the shelf that looked as though it was filled with miscellaneous white pebbles. However, on closer inspection it contained an assortment of teeth. At first, I entertained the possibility that this was left behind by some sentimental mother hoarding their child's lost baby teeth. But no, they were clearly adult teeth, and going by the dried bloodstains, none had been removed without a fight. The attached washroom was a study in contrasts. The bathtub was a stained gray basin fit to wash hogs. On the other hand, the sink was extravagant. There were 10 varieties of imported toothpaste, silk dental floss, a premium electric toothbrush with new adjustable heads, a water pick, and mouthwash from the Loire Valley. At night, I could hear the loud clanking of a hidden elevator. The shaft had to be adjacent to our room. We heard it ascend and descend the building and make a dinging noise every time it reached a new floor. The elevator wasn't the only noise. I swear I could hear the sounds of muffled screaming mixed with the high-pitched buzzing screech of a dentist's drill. The next morning, we both checked around the outside of our room, but we couldn't find any openings. I don't know why the elevator had to be hidden from guests. It would save so much climbing. The next morning, we went down to the kitchen for our complimentary breakfast. After the pizza in Pyongyang, I was excited to find out what our host had on offer. Sadly, all I found was a cupboard full of cereal boxes featuring photos of athletes from the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo. The contents had turned into a chalky powder that smelled like burnt Teflon. The rest of the kitchen was a disappointment. The fridge was chained up with a padlock, and the sink was clogged with handfuls of blood-soaked cotton gauze. The counter was strewn with a wide variety of rusted pliers soaking in alcohol. My boyfriend and I went out and saw the mass games and came back the same evening to find someone had rummaged through all our belongings. Nothing was missing, but there were muddy footprints and the room reeked of peppermint. We also found a pair of X-rays tacked to the wall that showed a human jawbone from different perspectives. That night, I couldn't sleep. My insomnia was made worse by the noise of the elevator, and the screams from below seemed closer and louder. My boyfriend snored away beside me undisturbed. I was staring into the darkness when I saw a sliver of light escape from a secret panel behind the Ceausescu poster. I kept still while it slowly swung open. An old Korean man wearing a blue dentist's mask and gown emerged. I could see he was carrying a large dental drill fed by a large power cable that trailed into the wall. He loomed over us, and I could hear his labored breathing. He looked like he was poised to pounce on us when I saw him examine our passports. He was suddenly taken aback and made an abrupt retreat. He grabbed the X-rays and quietly withdrew back behind the poster. I heard the elevator rattle and bang its way down into the bowels of the building. The next morning, my boyfriend and I checked out and caught a Koryo Airlines flight to Paektu Mountain. During the flight, I was rummaging through my carry-on luggage when I discovered that someone had placed a new travel-size toothbrush and floss into my bag. My boyfriend said it wasn't him, and I can't explain where it came from. I cannot recommend this Airbnb. The car's suspension squeaked loudly and my wife gasped as we went over a boulder which was embedded in the grassy road, scraping the car's undercarriage. Jagged chunks of rock were everywhere along this stretch, looking as if they could pop a tire if we went over them too quickly. The road had been more than a little bumpy, but the cabin wasn't far off. According to our directions, it was only another half-mile or so, and I had already caught glimpses of the lake through the trees, getting larger as we drew closer to it. I felt like leaving a complaint on the Airbnb account we had rented this cottage from, and we hadn't even gotten there yet. The directions had been atrocious, and this hardly even seemed like a road anymore. The pavement had turned to gravel a long way back, and after that it had become hard-packed dirt, then grass, with two barely visible tire ruts being the only indication of a road. At least we saw a few cottages, indicating that we were on the right path. We came around a sharp bend, and suddenly I had to slam hard on the brakes. There was a woman standing in the middle of the road. She was in her 60s or 70s by the looks of her. Her graying hair hung down over most of her face, only one eye visible behind the knotted strands. She stood in the middle of the grassy roadway and stared at us through the twisted net of hair. Normally, people in cottage country would wave and maybe even flag down a car like ours to say hello, since there were very few people around. But instead, she just stared at us, her head slightly tilted as if thinking. She made a very slow and wide sidestep to her right, turned on her heel, and walked away into the forest. Once she was in the trees, she disappeared completely. There was something very creepy about this. We were in the middle of nowhere, for one thing, and for another, there was no path where the woman had entered the forest. She had just seemingly wandered away into the wilderness. Her appearance had been startling as well. Her blue dress looking dirty and slightly ragged, belonging to a wardrobe from half a century ago, and not to mention that hair, covering her face like the girl from The Ring. I shuddered, feeling like a cold draft was coming from somewhere, but both the windows were closed to keep mosquitoes out of the car. "What the hell?" Christine muttered from beside me. "Who was that?" I didn't quite know what to say. Part of me wanted to turn around and go straight back the way we'd come. This peculiar stranger in the middle of the wilderness seemed like a very bad omen. But another part of me was saying that was ridiculous. We'd made a long drive to get here, and it wasn't necessary to leave just because we saw a random person on the road, probably in the midst of a mental health crisis. Or maybe she was just an eccentric, a hermit who lived alone in the forest, isolated from everyone. "I don't know," I answered. "Maybe she's just shy." My wife didn't sound reassured by this, but it was the only thing I could think of. The woman didn't look dangerous, just a bit off. Hopefully, she wouldn't bother us. I continued driving and came to a steep hill going upwards. Gunning the engine, I kicked up rocks and dirt as the tires spun on the slick mud, bouncing through potholes, the undercarriage dinging against the occasional rock or fallen branch. There was an old, dilapidated red cottage up ahead on our left, and a fork in the road led toward it down a steep gravel driveway, but the address wasn't right. "Looks like our place should be the next one," I said, realizing the numbers were getting closer. The cabin looked empty, with no signs of life that I could see. It was laying in the general direction where the woman had walked through the trees, and I wondered briefly if she lived there. I mentioned this to Christine. "Great! So the crazy lady is our neighbor," she said sarcastically. "Very reassuring." The car rumbled over a few more large boulders, and I weaved side to side to avoid them. It was a bright, clear day, and when we emerged from the trees I could see the water all around us, except for a narrow strip of land which led onwards. We'd finally made it to the peninsula where the cabin was located. There was only one thing separating us from the final stretch, narrow at first, then widening to 100 yards or more. The peninsula was at least half a mile long, and we would have it all to ourselves. First, though, we had to make it down a very steep hill. A gut-churning precipice stood before us, a 70-degree drop going straight down into a valley. Sharp rocks protruded from the dirt halfway down, and I would need to stay close to the trees to avoid them. "Stop!" my wife nearly screamed, causing me to hit the brakes. "This can't possibly be the right way." "Trust me," I said, taking a deep breath. "This is the right place. The hill's probably not as steep as it looks. I got this." Before she could say another word, I put the car back into gear and drove forward. The nose of the vehicle dipped in a terrifying way, and Christine gasped as we plunged over the edge, as if going off a cliff. We rocketed downwards, my stomach rising up like it would during the steep first drop of a roller coaster. The car was speeding rapidly down the slope, and I had no chance to avoid the rocks. I heard the undercarriage scrape loudly against the sharp stones, and the passenger side of the vehicle rose sharply for a second as we careened over a boulder. But then, finally, we leveled out sickeningly at the bottom, the front end nearly colliding with the grassy road. I hit the brakes and the car began to slow. Finally, I brought the vehicle to a halt, and we looked around to see we were almost completely surrounded by water. The engine was letting off a bit of steam, which was rising from the edges of the hood. I prayed it wouldn't burst into flames, leaving us stranded here. "Holy shit," Christine gasped. I tried to stay cool, as if I hadn't almost shit my pants. The steaming mist from the engine died down, and I let out a deep breath. "This must be it," I said. "Look at the water." It was on both sides of the car, only a foot away in the narrowest section. Lily pads and reeds stood beside us, and I saw frogs hopping in the grass. A heron took off nearby, its great wings flapping as it took to the sky, looking like a long-extinct dinosaur. I had to get out of the car to clear away a fallen branch as we got within sight of the cabin. Deer flies and mosquitoes assaulted me immediately. I was fighting them off with my baseball cap the whole time while moving the fallen tree branch. Several of them managed to sneak away with chunks of my flesh before I could swat them, and I yelped loudly when one deer fly bit the back of my neck, leaving a stinging welt. Finally, we pulled up outside the cabin, and I let out an exhausted breath as I put the car in park and let the engine die with a hissing rattle that didn't sound healthy. I got out of the car on wobbly legs, and the first thing I noticed was how silent it was this far away from the city. There was no background noise at all, just utter quiet. The soft sound of the waves lapping into the shore from the lake was the only thing that could be heard, and the occasional buzz of an insect droning past. It was a warm, calm evening in early summer, and it looked like we had the entire lake to ourselves, aside from the woman who we had seen down the road. The two of us looked up at the place where we would be spending the weekend. It was a small, unremarkable box of a cabin with brown siding, a narrow wooden staircase leading up to a screen door at the front. To the right of the car was a boathouse, perched on tilted footings that looked ready to collapse at any second. "That doesn't look safe," I said, pointing out the odd angle at which the secondary structure was sitting, just beside us. At least the cabin was standing straight up and down, and it looked well secured from animals and the elements. A sturdy wooden door was behind the screen, and I opened it with a key contained in a nearby lockbox. At first I thought it wouldn't open, as the key got stuck inside the lock, but eventually it turned with an effort. I opened the door, and it creaked loudly on its hinges. We stepped into the dusty cabin, and I brushed spider webs aside to walk down the entry hallway. There was a smell inside the place that hit me right away, like a punch to the face, a stink of death and decay. A dead mouse somewhere, maybe? No, it was worse than that. stronger. "Ugh, what's that stink?" Christine asked immediately, setting down her bags to hold her shirt over her face. "I don't know," I answered. "Smells like something died in here." It turned out I wasn't wrong. After opening every window and unpacking our belongings, we settled down onto the couch in the living area. The breeze from the lake was helping with the unpleasant odor, but it wasn't taking it away completely. It hung heavy in the air around us, and with it was that eerie feeling that something was off about this place. The smell of death and the strange woman on the road, all of it so unsettling. We tried to distract ourselves by thinking of some activity to do, but it was difficult with the limited resources available. There were some dusty board games laying underneath a cabinet, but on inspection they were chewed up and filled with ancient mouse turds, missing most of their pieces, making them useless. It was too late to go swimming. It was too hot to light a fire in the indoor fireplace, and too buggy to light one outdoors. The place had no electricity or any real means of entertainment. All we could do was watch Netflix on the tiny screen of my phone, trying to ignore that stink of death coming from somewhere. The data signal kept going in and out, and eventually we put our phones away, giving up on entertainment altogether. "I hope you brought a good book," I joked to Christine. "I guess it's probably for the best anyways. It's not like we came up here to watch Netflix." "Yeah," Christine agreed. "There's supposed to be a boat. Maybe we can take it out on the lake tomorrow." "Sounds good. It's probably locked up in that boathouse that looks ready to fall over outside. Hopefully, the boat is in decent shape at least." I was already picturing a rusted rowboat with cartoonishly large holes in its bottom, but I didn't say that out loud. Something about this weekend had to turn out right. The pictures on Airbnb had been very misleading, though. The two of us read a couple paperbacks for a while, lighting the kerosene lanterns to see once it was completely dark outside. It wasn't even 10 o'clock by the time Christine said she was ready for bed. The couch we were sitting on was a futon, so we unfolded it to make it into a bed. She laid down and closed her eyes, but I wasn't quite ready to go to sleep yet. "I'm going to go out and look at the stars," I said. "I'll be back in a few minutes." She nodded, already half asleep, and I made my way across the creaky floorboards of the cabin to the front door, opening the screen to let myself out into the cool night air. The breeze coming in off the lake was chilly, and we had closed the windows partway to avoid freezing throughout the night. The smell had begun to creep back in, even worse than before, and it was nice to be away from it and breathing the fresh air off the lake. I looked up at the sky and saw it was a clear night, the slim, sickle moon making it easy to see the stars. There were so many of them, far more than I'd ever seen in the city. I could make out the hazy stardust of the Milky Way and stared in awe at the infinity of twinkling lights that made up the dusty white streak of our galaxy in the sky. I tried to imagine our planet as it truly was, just an infinitely small speck floating in that massive, swirling saucer of milk that made up this cluster of stars we call home. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and I let out a soft gasp. It was so beautiful up here, it almost made me forget about the little things that had creeped me out about the place. The weird lady on the road and the smell in the cottage. Those things were momentarily forgotten as I gazed up at the sky in wonder, looking for constellations and picking out the ones I knew best. I'm not sure how long I stood out there for, staring at the stars, but it was long enough for me to begin to feel cold, and for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. When I looked down at the area around the cottage again, I was surprised to see it was no longer pitch black. Due to my eyes adjusting, I could now see well enough to make out the vague details of the road leading away from the cabin. Fireflies lit up intermittently, glowing in the distance, near and far. Then my eyes settled on something horrifying. Between the trees up ahead, I made out the dark silhouette of a person standing in the road, about 50 yards away. I was so startled, I let out a strangled noise that was halfway between a gasp and a groan. My heart was hammering as I looked at that shape, trying to tell myself I wasn't seeing it. That it couldn't be real, that it couldn't be a person. But then the dark form took a step into the trees and there was no longer any way to deny it. I was about to turn around to run when I heard a sound to my right. A twig snapping underfoot as someone moved in the undergrowth of the forest. Trees stood on either side of me and I looked to see another figure standing there amongst their trunks. This one only 10 or 15 yards away. They moved when I glanced over, to hide behind the bulk of a tree. Then there was another sound to my left. Someone shifting on their feet in the forest. There were more of them. Too scared to move or think, I just stood there, frozen. I had heard of the deer in the headlights phenomenon, but I had never experienced it for myself. The sheer terror of being frozen in place as death moves toward you. One of those shadows popped out from behind a tree again, as if looking at me, and this time it didn't try to hide. It emerged and started coming toward me. The details of its face became more visible as it came out from the trees, stalking my way, boots crunching over dead leaves and twigs. Finally, I came to my senses and began running for the front door of the cabin. I heard footsteps coming from behind me, but was too terrified to look back. The soft glow of light from the kerosene lamps shone through the screen door, and I tried not to trip as I raced up the stairs and fought to open it. At first, the weather-beaten handle didn't want to function, as I tried desperately to turn it. I slammed my fist against the rusted button again and again to no avail. Finally, I slammed my palm against it and felt it give way. The door swung open towards me, and I nearly fell off the narrow porch as I stepped around it to go inside. I pulled it shut and looked through the glass to see 3 figures approaching, 2 of them holding long blades in their hands. One of them looked like a sickle, in the same shape as the slim moon above, the sort of tool you would use to harvest wheat in the days before modern technology. The person wielding that blade let it scrape across the car's paint as they approached, and the high-pitched screech of it echoed in the still night air. There was no way to make out their faces, but I got the impression at least 2 of them were men, their forms large and looming, but the third person was a bit smaller and I wondered if it might be a woman. Just before I slammed the wooden door shut, I saw they were wearing masks. A pig, a bird, and a wolf by the looks of them. The masks were simple plastic, like the ones that children wore at Halloween when I was a small child. Cheap, flimsy-looking things strapped around their heads with thin elastic bands. They wore simple clothes, plaid flannel shirts and jeans with holes in the knees, and dirty boots. All 3 of them walked slowly toward the front door of the cabin, as if not in any particular hurry to murder us. I slammed the wooden door shut and threw the deadbolt closed, then spun around at the sound of movement behind me. Terrified, I almost hurled a blow at the person standing there, but then quickly realized it was my wife. "Close the windows! There are people with knives outside!" I screamed. Her face was white with shock and she didn't move for a few long moments. Finally, she got moving and turned around, going to close the windows all around the cabin which we had opened to get rid of the smell. Tink, tink, tink. There was a sound of tapping on the glass behind me, and I looked to see a face peering in at me through the small window at the top of the wooden door. It wasn't big enough for the person to come through, just large enough for me to see their face. It was the person in the wolf mask looking in at me. Their eyes were just dark, shadowy slits cut into the mask, and the overall effect was terrifying as they stared in at me through that window, holding up the knife. "Is the back door locked?" I yelled to Christine, patting down my pockets for my phone. It wasn't there. "I locked them," she yelled back. "Call 911." A window smashed at the back of the house and I heard my wife scream. I ran back into the living area to see the large man wearing the pig mask was climbing in through the window he had just broken, and my wife was picking up a chair from the dining room to throw at him. She flung it across the room, and the chair legs shattered and splintered on impact as it hit the man, but he acted as if nothing had happened. A second later, I heard a loud noise coming from the front door, and turned around to see it flying from its hinges as it was kicked in by a heavy boot. Wolf Mask came in, and the one in the bird mask followed after him. I saw she was definitely a woman, judging by the looks of her. We were surrounded now. There were 3 of them, 2 holding knives and the smaller one carrying a pistol, blocking both ways out. For a moment, all 5 of us just stood there, breathing heavily and staring at each other. And then the man in the wolf mask spoke. "We weren't going to hurt you," he said in a low voice, "as long as you cooperate. Put these on, now." He threw a set of handcuffs at me and another set at my wife. The woman in the bird mask had a gun in her hand, and it was pointed at my face. She took a step closer, chambering a round in the semi-automatic pistol as she did so, as if daring me to refuse. I put the handcuffs on, and my wife did the same. The man threw a burlap sack at me and one at my wife. "Put those on, over your heads," he said. I hesitated, more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. The idea of being blind and helpless at the mercy of these 3 maniacs was more than I could take. "Please," I said. "We don't have much money. You can take the car, our credit cards, whatever you want." The woman came closer, her finger getting ready to squeeze the trigger. "Put the foking hoods on," she spit at me, not asking. This time, I didn't argue. I reluctantly covered my head with the burlap sack, and Christine did the same. Everything went dark, and it was difficult to breathe with my head covered in the thick fabric. It was warm inside, and humid with the heat of my heavy breathing. My heart pounded fast in my chest, my throat dry. "Now listen up," the man said. "You 2 are going to walk outside single file, and then you're going to get into the back seat of your car. Where are the keys?" "In my pants pocket," I managed to say, and a second later there was a hand reaching for them and taking them out. "That's all you need to worry about for now. Just walk to the car and sit down inside. Got it?" I nodded and heard Christine mutter her agreement. Possibilities of what might be happening began to flood my mind as we were marched outside to our vehicle. Everything from ritual sacrifice, cult initiation, and worse occurred to me as we were shoved roughly into the back seat of the car. The most likely scenario came to me last, and I realized with horror that it was probably what was happening. The way they were talking back and forth to each other, and the no-nonsense way in which they were taking us from this place, made it clear to me. It came to me with a shocking clarity. We were going to be sold. Human trafficking was a big business in the world, despite beliefs that slavery was a thing of the past. People are a valuable commodity, and once you are in bondage, it becomes very difficult to convince anyone that you belong elsewhere. Forced labor camps, factories, sweatshops, and sex rings where people are forced into prostitution. I had seen stories about these types of places on the news, but it wasn't talked about much. People didn't like to think about it. But these operations exist in almost every country in the world. Sons and daughters are taken from their families and are made to work for pimps as sex slaves, or are crammed shoulder to shoulder into sweatshops in unseen basements, forced to sew clothing and shoes. And some people, like these folks who were taking us from the cabin, made a handsome profit by finding people for these operations. Maybe they were the ones who rented the cottage to us, or maybe they just knew we were going to be here, but I had a feeling it was the former, not the latter. Once we were in the back seat of the car, there wasn't much we could do but sit and wait. I thought the people holding us captive would start to drive the car away from the cabin, but they didn't. Instead, we just sat there, sweating in the back of the vehicle, waiting for what felt like forever. I heard someone breathing in the front seat of the car and figured it was the woman. She was watching us while the two men did something inside the cottage. But what were they doing exactly? Finally, someone opened the car door and a gruff voice told us to get out. They marched us back up the steps through the front door of the cottage, and once we were inside again, I smelled the plastic. They pulled the hoods off our heads, and I saw the living space was now draped with tarps and clear plastic sheeting. They had converted the main living area of the cabin, making it into a kill room. "Get on your knees," the man in the wolf mask said, and I saw he had the gun in his hand now. He was pointing it at our faces, and we did as he asked. "You've been waiting a long time for this, you earned it. Are you ready?" he asked the woman wearing the bird mask. She took a deep, trembling breath and said, "I think so." "Are you ready?" he asked again, this time in a darker, more ominous tone. "Yes," she answered back, this time sounding a little bit more sure of herself. "Good," he said, turning to face the man in the pig mask. "Give her the reaping blade. It is time for her to become one of the horde." He passed the long, curved blade that looked like a scythe, giving it to the woman. She took it in her hands and stepped forward, coming within arm's reach of us. She began to speak under her breath, the words sounding like a prayer or an incantation. Moving behind us, I felt the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. She was still speaking in that low, terrifying voice, saying words I didn't understand in an ancient language long dead and lost to time. My thoughts were racing, images flashing in front of my eyes of good times and bad, cherished friends and loved ones. Everything went through my head in an instant, as I tried to grapple with the reality that I was about to die in this cabin. And just as I felt the air move around my neck, indicating the scythe was settling in under my chin to do its work, there was a knock at the front door, a soft sound of knuckles tapping against the glass. "Who is that?" Pig Mask muttered under his breath. "How the folk should I know? Go look. Take the gun," Wolf Mask answered. He handed him the gun, and the man went to the front door, moving slowly, looking a bit nervous as he did so. The handcuffs were digging into my wrists painfully, and I tried to keep breathing. We were being granted a few more precious seconds of life. I wouldn't waste them. If there was some way we could get out of this, I would go for it. I wouldn't waste the opportunity if someone were trying to save us. Maybe it was the police, a voice in my mind said. Maybe someone heard the sound of the window breaking and they called the cops. There's a chance we could still survive this. "There's nobody out here," Pig Mask called from the front door. "Must have just been the wee—" His voice cut out abruptly, and there was a loud noise from the front door. It sounded like an axe cutting into a very wet piece of wood. A second later, there was a piercing, high-pitched scream. I thought it sounded like a woman at first, but then heard Pig Mask's voice saying, "You bitch! You fucking bitch! I'll fucking kill you!" There was a sound of a gun being fired over and over again. It echoed loudly through the cabin and made the man in the wolf mask run to the front door. "Watch them!" he yelled at the woman, who was still holding the scythe around my neck. "Move, and you die," she said to me after he was gone, but I heard a quaking in her voice, indicating she was more scared than she was letting on. "What happened? Oh, Jesus, Frank, what the folk happened to your leg?" I heard Wolf Mask saying from the front door. Pig Mask answered back, saying something incomprehensible. Take the gun. I'm fucking bleeding out here, man, oh God, I gotta get to a hospital." "Shut up! Shut your mouth and keep quiet. She's still here somewhere. Where did she go?" Christine and I didn't dare move as the woman held the blade at my throat, her hands shaking badly. Still, I was starting to feel more and more hopeful that we might get out of this. But who could possibly be outside doing all this? Was it a cop? I momentarily imagined some seasoned veteran who had been on the force for 30 years, hiding in the trees and taking them out one by one like a lady version of John McClane. I just hoped she could stay alive long enough to finish them off. It was quiet again for a few long minutes. There wasn't a single sound from outside. And then I heard another meaty thwack before dead silence again. The woman holding the blade at our necks began to look towards the door, moving away from us. "Don't you fucking move," she said, holding the scythe out menacingly. The two of us nodded. "Hey, you guys okay?" she yelled. After a few moments, there was still no response. A tapping sound came from the back window, and she spun around looking scared. There was no one looking in through the glass. All that could be seen was darkness outside. The other shattered window at the back of the cabin was letting in a howling rush of air, the cold breeze frigid like ice as it came in off the lake. But there was another sound coming through the window as well, a choked, strangled sound, like someone coughing up blood. "John?" the woman in the bird mask called out. "Are you okay?" There was no answer. "You motherfuckers," she screamed at us. "Who's out there? Tell me. One of your friends. Did someone follow you up here?" She was coming closer to us, brandishing the scythe in her hands, looking ready to start swinging it. "Are you cops? Is that it? Did you figure out what we were doing up here? Tell me, what did you do to him?" The two of us just shook our heads, confused and unsure how to answer. Neither one of us knew what the hell was going on. Finally, she gave up on questioning us and ran outside, screaming bloody murder. A gunshot went off outside, and it was quiet again afterwards. The lake was still and peaceful once again. After what felt like hours, I stood to my feet. Terrified of what I might encounter outside, I began to move handcuffed toward the front door of the cabin. Just outside, Pig Mask was cold and dead on the front porch, leaking an impossible amount of blood from a gaping leg wound. I found the handcuff keys in his pocket and removed the cuffs from my wife's wrists, struggling to do so with my hands still behind my back. She let me out of my restraints next, and we went down the wooden steps outside to survey the property, sneaking towards the back of the cabin as quietly as we could. Wolf Mask and Bird Mask were found out back, their bodies cold and leaking blood from horrifying wounds. They had both been attacked by someone with a hatchet, by the looks of it, but there was no sign of who could have done it. After a few minutes, the two of us went back inside and looked around at the plastic sheets draped on the walls. They had been very organized, whoever these people were. They had done this before. The smell of death and decay was stronger than ever, and I realized it was coming from the storage room. We went in there and saw a hatch leading down into a basement, beneath the cabin. It had been hidden beneath a shelf, but now it was wide open, letting out more of that terrible smell from whatever was concealed down there. I didn't want to look inside that dark, terrifying space, but I felt like I needed to. I needed some form of closure. I wanted to see what the folk these people had been doing here, and what they almost did to us. Going down the ladder, I nearly vomited at the sight of all the dead, decaying bodies. There were dozens of them down there, hidden beneath the cabin. Each one had its throat slit, the faces frozen in masks of terror. There was a shrine at one end of the confined room, with candles surrounding it. Symbols were painted on the walls in blood, and a terrible, unholy aura could be felt down there. After a few moments, I'd had enough. I went back up the ladder, vomiting immediately once I was out of that horrible smell. Not that it was much better on ground level. We didn't know what to do after that. With the two of us alive and so many dead bodies on the property, it suddenly occurred to me that we could be blamed for this. The police could try to pin the murders on us. After all, there was no one else around. The mysterious person who had saved us was long gone, and I knew from experience that our story would not necessarily hold up in court. The two of us would likely be charged with a triple murder and would go to prison for the rest of our lives. So we did the only thing we could think to do. We dragged all 3 bodies down to the basement, leaving them with the rest of the corpses. We cleaned up the plastic sheeting, stuffing it down the hidden trapdoor as well. We covered the hatch with a shelf, just as it had been when we arrived. And then we packed up our things and got in the car and drove away. By this point, it was morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the lake. It was a beautiful view, but we didn't stay to admire it. We were cutting our weekend at the lake short, but for good reasons. As much as we'd been looking forward to getting away from it all, I'd be 1,000,000 times happier now, being home again. There's nothing like almost dying to make you appreciate what you have in life, let me tell you. I gunned the engine up the big hill, and we drove past the rusty red cottage down the lane, where the old woman lived, who we had seen on the way in. As we drove past her cottage, we saw she was outside, doing chores. She looked up from what she was doing and waved at us with a red-stained hand. She was washing the blood from her clothes, using a basin of water from the lake. After getting the stain out of the ragged blue dress, she hung it up on the line to dry, and then went back to chopping firewood. She swung the axe down hard on a block of wood, splitting it in 2. A second later, the hatchet was up in the air again, and she was bringing it down on another log, splitting it in one swing. I was reminded again not to judge a book by its cover. The woman had looked crazy, and we'd mocked her and teased her for the way she lived out here, a hermit alone on the lake. But she had saved our lives. She must have suspected something was off with her neighbors running the Airbnb and decided to intervene. The old woman was scrawny, but she was stronger than she looked. Living on the lake with its chilly breezes, chopping firewood to stay warm for so many years, she had really learned how to swing a hatchet. And thank God for that. The Airbnb was pristine. It was calm, quiet, and perfect. It was cliché in the sense that no picture could ever do it justice. Lee and I pulled up to the Airbnb and were greeted by our hosts, a smart-looking, intelligent woman of the world named Andrea, and a well-dressed, charming man named Robert. The couple was probably mid-60s. Their combined languages listed on their page was over 10, and they had visited 80 countries in their time together. Even if the Airbnb hadn't looked like the quintessential getaway, Lee and I would have chosen to stay here just because of our hosts. They were kind, well-mannered, and knowledgeable. Andrea was impressed by Lee's writing skills and my fiber crafting. We shared a short dinner after our long drive with our hosts, just a quick getting-to-know-you meal they had prepared ahead of time. "Well, we'll let you get unpacked and settled," Andrea said after she had showed us our space. We had the entire lower half of the house to ourselves, and it was as spotless and calming as the outside was. "We can't access this area from the staircase, just as you can't access our area." We made sure it was as private as could be. We thanked Andrea for her hospitality, bid them both good night, and turned in. We had a full weekend ahead of us. There was the writers' convention we came down here for, and an entire festival dedicated to knitting, crocheting, and the like, on top of general tourist things. Lee and I had never been to Tennessee before. Well, I hadn't, she had, but didn't remember it, so it doesn't count. The Airbnb lacked a TV and cell service. We knew this ahead of time and had chosen the Airbnb partially because of that. What better way to disconnect from the world, get some writing done and private time together, than in a house with no cell service? Our first night went smoothly. The food and the long drive left us both drained, and we cuddled comfortably in the clean bed before drifting off to sleep, uninterrupted by phone calls or the ding of social media beckoning. Saturday went by in a hectic daze. The convention went well, and Lee made a lot of important connections. Plus, I got to meet some of her online writer friends that have helped her through some tough writing spots. I enjoyed the colorfulness and community feel of the Fiber Crafts Festival. I purchased enough yarn to make a sweater for Lee come winter, a little handmade Tennessee souvenir. When we returned to the Airbnb, Andrea greeted us again and asked us how our day went. We shared with her our altogether pleasant Tennessee experience so far, and she was pleased we had enjoyed ourselves. She offered to bring us out some lemonade while we soaked our feet in the river in front of her home. We accepted graciously and giggled like schoolgirls over how amazing a host Andrea was. The river was well taken care of and clean. Andrea and Robert owned a private mile of the river, and she told us how they painstakingly looked after it every weekend. We could tell how immensely proud Andrea was of her home, and we told her so. She smiled at us and told us they had lived there for 20 years. "It is the safest, most beautiful place I've ever lived," she told us. Robert came home and Andrea left to have dinner with her husband. Lee and I kept our feet in the river, sipping on the delicious lemonade Andrea had made and discussing plans for the rest of the trip. The river water was cool on our hot skin, the stones smooth and slippery from that thin slime water builds up. I called it river snot. Lee had the actual term for it, but I forgot what it was as soon as she said it. We returned Andrea's glasses and lemonade pitcher and returned to the privacy of our half of the house. We played a quick game of Scrabble before Lee pulled out her laptop and started working on her most recent novel. The writers' convention had given her quite a few ideas, and she didn't want to lose them. Lee lightly complained how without Wi-Fi, she had to make notes in the notepad part of her laptop, instead of in her Google Docs with the rest of her research on the novel. That's what we wanted. I teased her, I kissed her on the head and decided on a bubble bath while she worked. Why not continue to relax? We only had half a day left on the vacation, and then we would have to start the long drive home. The Airbnb had a huge clawfoot tub in the spotless bathroom, and I took full advantage of it, sinking down to my ears in bubbles and steaming water. I stayed in my watery hideaway, daydreaming a little, until the water started to get cold. Lee called out to me just as I was planning on getting out of the tub. She was ready for bed. We crawled into the bed that had been freshly made up for us while we were gone. Something that would have bothered me in any other circumstance because of our privacy, but I wasn't too bothered by it this time. Just Andrea being an extraordinary host again, no big deal. Lee and I drifted asleep almost immediately to the sound of crickets, frogs, and our own breathing. We were wrenched from sleep when a blood-chilling scream came from upstairs. Lee jolted awake beside me, jerking upright. She was always easier to startle than I was. I laid perfectly still, holding her hand in the dark, waiting for any other sounds. We were both positive we heard a scream, and we were both fairly sure it had been Andrea. Without any other sounds for context, we weren't sure if she had stubbed her toe, had a nightmare, or if her and Robert were giving it a go. Even if we thought they were injured, we couldn't get to them, and we had no service to call someone. I had to reassure Lee that we were doing the right thing by going back to sleep. There wasn't anything else we could do. When we see Andrea in the morning, I promised Lee we'll ask her what the hell that was about. Morning came around and we were slow to rise. We slept poorly after the scream. Lee tossed and turned, worrying over our decision to not at least go see if everyone was all right, and I couldn't fall back asleep if I had wanted to. Which I hadn't. Safest place she'd ever lived or not. Andrea's scream had put me on red alert. Lee and I were in an unknown area, and I wanted to be prepared for the worst. Eventually, we roused from bed and got ready for the day. We had a late checkout, 4 p.m., something we had cleared with Andrea weeks ago. She had assured us she would be delighted if we stay another day in Tennessee. the more time to see everything with. She had messaged us. We left the Airbnb, a little shocked to see that Andrea wasn't outside tending to her garden, waiting to see us off. We drove away anyway, a full day of touristy things to do before we had to get home. We enjoyed ourselves, even with the unspoken guilt hanging between us. We arrived back at the Airbnb around 3 p.m. We wanted plenty of time to pack and say our goodbyes. When we pulled up, we saw only Robert standing on the porch. He was surrounded by our things. "Robert, what is going on?" I asked him as I stepped out of the car. "Andrea packed for you," he said simply. While I understood going above and beyond, this was a little much, and I was a little angry. That is a bit of an invasion of privacy. Andrea cleared us for a late checkout. I didn't think it would be a problem. I tried. "No problem at all. Happy to help." Robert interrupted me. Lee grabbed my hand and gripped hard. We could both sense that Robert was a little off. "Well, how do we know she packed everything? Can we at least look around the space to make sure nothing was forgotten?" I asked, miffed. Robert grinned at me slowly. The grin felt wrong, inhuman. It didn't reach his eyes, and it surely wasn't a friendly gesture. "No, Andrea is an excellent cleaner, as you can see." He swept his arm out stiffly, indicating to the pristine property. "And even if she missed a tiny item or two, we'll gladly send it back to you, free of charge." "I'm really not comfortable with this." I tried again. Robert interrupted me again. "I'll put these in your trunk for you, and then I hope you ladies have a safe trip." Robert walked robotically to the car and loaded up our suitcases in Lee's laptop bag. She rushed over to the bag, not caring about our host's feelings at this point, and ripped open the case, checking to make sure her precious laptop was safe. Robert returned to the top of the steps and gave us a little wave. "Where is Andrea?" I asked Robert. "We would love to say goodbye. You've both been great." Robert grinned at me again, giving me chills. Lee's hand shook in mine when she came back to my side. "Andrea is resting. She cleaned the entire time you were gone. She gets a little overwhelmed." I saw nothing else we could do. I knew that as soon as I had signal, I would email Andrea to make sure she was all right and thank her for all she had done for us. Robert was acting weird, but Andrea had shown us only kindness. "Thanks, Robert. Thank Andrea for us, too," I said simply. I walked Lee to her side of the car and opened her door for her. When she was safely in, I walked to the driver's side. Robert never stopped grinning at me as I did. He kept grinning and waving, standing stiff as a board. We drove away and didn't look back. Lee and I both released our breath in huge gusts when we were a safe distance away. "That was absolutely bonkers," Lee bursted out. I had to agree with her. That was incredibly strange indeed. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the drive. When we got home and had signal, I emailed Andrea, as I promised myself I would. It bounced back to me with an error, stating the email no longer existed. I looked for their Airbnb so I could contact Andrea that way. Their Airbnb was gone. "Lee?" I asked her. She was poring through her laptop, making sure nothing was broken or missing. "Lee, their Airbnb is just gone. And any mention of their home in my notes is gone," she told me. She spun the laptop around and just pointed at the screen. I couldn't know what she wrote, of course, but I believed her when she said bits were missing. "What the hell happened down there?" Lee asked me, her voice shaking. "I have no idea." I wish I had answers to soothe her, soothe myself. I wish I knew what steps to take next. Did we call the police? Tell them that an old guy packed our bags and removed his home from Airbnb? Tell them we didn't see the usually chipper Andrea on our last day. Maybe they should check on her? Lee and I discussed it. We didn't live in the area, we didn't know how the police would react or if they would even help. Perhaps Robert was just done with Airbnb. Perhaps Andrea really was just overwhelmed cleaning up that big of a property. We would let it go, for now. I checked the local news for that area daily. I figured if anything did happen that was malicious or strange, it would be a while before we heard about it. Robert and Andrea's property was 2 or 3 miles down a gravel road, completely isolated from the other houses in the area. I didn't know if they had friends or living family that visited often. I didn't know anything about them other than what they posted on their Airbnb page, really. And that no longer existed. 4 months after our trip to Tennessee, Lee started planning another vacation. She wanted to use the Airbnb services again, but this time maybe we'd travel west and stay a little longer. She was excited, having forgotten about the weird end to our last Airbnb visit. I tried to share her excitement, but I checked the Tennessee local news again before I agreed to anything definite. There was a small blurb written that made my heart sink. The body of 62-year-old Andrea Witt had been found in the river. When they tried to inform Robert Witt, 65, and question him, they found his body long dead in their home. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The note next to him simply said, "I'm tired." There was no other explanation offered for why he suddenly killed his wife and then himself. I have yet to figure out how to tell Lee. She said she's just booked a quaint Airbnb out in Colorado. A narrator reached out to me after finding my stories on creepypasta.org. I usually ignore these requests, especially when they begin with, "I'm starting a new channel," because they often ask for my work for free. Sometimes, to add insult to injury, they're not even narrating but just using AI. I was going to close the message when the narrator followed up with, "You'll be paid a flat fee of $300 per story." That perked up my interest. "Why so high?" I messaged, and was informed that I would have to sell all rights to the story. It would belong wholly to the Scream Collector, the channel, and I wouldn't be able to reprint or repost anywhere. If I accepted the commission, a list of guidelines would be emailed to me. "How long do the stories have to be?" I asked. 2,000 to 4,000 words, they replied. The stories would be released in a kind of anthology centered around the fictional town of Pine Fell. I was the first author contacted, but if the channel was successful, the anthology would be expanded to include other writers. The stories would all be published by the Scream Collector, or TSC as the name was displayed on the channel logo, with the conceit being that they were all true stories being shared by the titular collector of Pine Fell. In short, I wouldn't get any writing credit since my stories would all be penned by the collector. $300 per story was decent money, but selling all rights? Not even getting my name attached? I messaged back that I'd have to think about it. TSC said of course, but not to take too long because they were contacting other writers, and I might lose out on the opportunity. In the end, I accepted because of the money, obviously. I mean, how many times had I let my stories be narrated for free in exchange for exposure? And how had that panned out for me? No, this time I'd take money. Given how stereotypical the channel looked, they only had one video, introducing the town of Pine Fell with a spooky and obviously AI, voice. It didn't seem like I'd have much room for creativity. I'd just be writing formulaic, trope-filled, utterly generic creepypastas. I was sent a contract in standard legalese about what we'd discussed. I'd sell all rights for $300 per story to belong to TSC, the Scream Collector. After I signed and sent back the contract, they sent me the guidelines. This is where things got weird. I was asked to write the story in a Google Doc. I'd be sent a link to the shared doc. But I wouldn't be the primary owner. and would have no power to change the settings or anything like that. The document would belong to the channel. I found this a bit controlling, but I was told since all stories were set in this shared universe in the small fictional town of Pinefell and had to have shared elements, and since I was giving over all rights and it would belong to the channel, they'd rather have it in their own Google Doc. Made sense, I guess. And they had some standard stipulations like 2 4K words, minimal dialogue, PG-13, mild swearing okay but no F-bombs, all pretty normal for a story that would wind up being used as a narration. But after this part, I'm just going to paste the rest of the guidelines here so you can read them. Write only in the Google Doc, and not in any other document or file. You may only write in the Google Doc between the hours of 6 to 8 p.m. You may not make any edits or changes outside of those hours. Somewhere in the story, include the phrase na ku oi fi em hak tako ti riti. Do not speak this phrase aloud. Before writing, check your closet. While writing, be sure your door is locked. After writing, if the story is not yet finished, say aloud, "Scream collector, do not come. There is nothing to collect." Then close the document. If the story is finished, say aloud, "Scream collector, come and collect," and type "fin" at the end of the document before closing it. This was all so bizarre. I mean, I assumed it was some sort of weird roleplay based on the channel concept, but the contract hadn't mentioned anything about it, so I messaged back TSC. These aren't real guidelines, right? You don't seriously want me to only write between 6 to 8 p.m.? TSC. The guidelines are part of a team effort for the universe we're making. So, yes, everyone involved needs to play along, writers included. That's why we're paying such a high price. And you'll be expected to follow the theme we'll send for each story. Write between 6 to 8 p.m., follow all guidelines. You only have to be in character while writing. The rest of your day is yours to be OOC. That's why the limited time frame. So, do you still want the commission? Why? N. Me. What if I break the guidelines? TSC. Your payment is contingent on delivering a story that complies with guidelines. If your story doesn't meet our guidelines, you won't get paid, or you'll be paid at a reduced rate, or otherwise penalized. Do you still want the commission? N. In the end, obviously, I took the commission. And the very first story I was asked to write, ironically, was a rules story, the most popular kind on YouTube and the creepypasta website. Here is the prompt I was sent. The protagonist is a visitor to an Airbnb in Pinefell who finds a strange list of rules. They disappear after breaking a rule. Their body eventually found dismembered in suitcases and lunchboxes hidden around a playground. Story should include 3-7 rules. See attached playground photo for inspiration. I opened the attached photo of an old, abandoned playground in tall grass with a bright yellow spiraling plastic slide. Ugh, I thought. A rules story, really? The most basic spaghetti of creepypastas. I finally came up with some rules after Googling pictures of Airbnbs and looking at some of the rules hosts often have for guests. I tweaked a few normal rules to make them seem just a little off, jotted them down, and was about to type them in the Google Doc when I realized it was only 11 a.m. Per the rules guidelines, I couldn't begin writing until 6 p.m. Such a stupid, arbitrary rule, though it seemed bad form to break it immediately, especially given the nature of the story I was writing. And I wasn't getting paid until I actually delivered said story. At 6 p.m., I was about to finally start drafting when I remembered the check your closet rule. Such nonsense, I grumbled, getting up to stalk over to the closet and fling open the door. My one-bedroom apartment has 2 closets, one with sliding doors in the bedroom, the other a coat closet in the living room. I guess the bathroom also has a linen closet, but it's so small it's almost more of a cupboard. Anyway, I checked all of them. Then I plonked my butt into my desk chair and opened the Google Doc, and then remembered the lock your door rule, so with a sigh I got up to check, but I generally always keep my door locked, and today was no exception. So I sat back down and started typing. The story came easily. I don't know if it was because of the 2-hour time limit or what, but my fingers flew, and before long the entire story was finished. I even included the phrase na ku oi fi hc ta ko trt without any awkwardness. Just had it scrawled in a room in the Airbnb, adding to the overall creepy vibe as the protagonist settles in. Once or twice while writing, I spotted the cursor for another viewer on the Google Doc. Soon enough, I finished writing. I cleared my throat, rolled my eyes so hard they almost fell out of my head, and said aloud, "Hey, Scream Collector, come and collect." I typed Finn. Instantly, the story vanished. The screen was just blank. The entire Google Doc wiped. I started to freak out, not because I feared it was supernatural, I'd already seen the other cursor on there, but because my 2 hours of hard work, all those words, how could I prove that I actually... Just then, I got an email. The money was in my PayPal account. I'd just been paid $300 for the 2,500 words I'd written. I also got a new message with the next prompt. A couple who are lost in the woods just outside Pinefell meet a skinwalker. At the end, only their skins are found. Attached was a photo of some generic pine forest along hilly trails. I sighed at the prompt. Not only another cliché, but a culturally appropriative one. Was every story going to be something off the top 10 tropes list? What next, a grizzled detective and some unsolved murders? A bunch of kids meet Slender Man? Still, money was money. The next day, I started writing at 6 p.m., after checking the closets and locking the door. I didn't finish the story, though, because I've never been a big fan of Lost in the Woods stories. I like nature. I find it beautiful and relaxing, not scary. Not to mention I wasn't sure what to do instead of a skinwalker. For now, I was going with generic predatory monster. But after getting halfway through the draft, it just wasn't creepy enough, and I erased almost all of it. The time was 7:58 p.m., so I logged off. I fell asleep thinking about how I could make this Lost in the Woods concept genuinely scary, and around 2 a.m., I woke up with an idea. I went to the Google Doc and added a description of an unseen predator that devours the insides of its prey, leaving only the skins like the husks of fruit. I was pretty groggy, not fully awake until, suddenly, I noticed the lines I'd just added were being deleted. Someone was on there. And they erased the words I wrote as I was writing. My heart thudded in my chest. Suddenly, I was wide awake. I remembered the rule about not writing except between 6 and 8 p.m. It had seemed like some sort of ridiculous role play, but the fact they were actually enforcing it? That was creepy. I closed my laptop and went back to bed. I just ended up lying awake wondering, who was up watching the Google Doc? And why had my lines been deleted? Did that mean I wouldn't get paid? All the next day I kept thinking of that other cursor on the Google Doc. It was there again at 6 p.m. when I finally sat down to write, popping in and out, though it didn't actually make any edits this time. It took me 4 days, but I finally finished the story. Not my best work, but scary enough, I supposed. I typed the last paragraph, describing the gory discarded skins, the painted pink fingernails now stained with blood, and then I typed Finn right at 8 p.m. and called out to the collector, and just like before, the story vanished, and money appeared in my account. Apparently, my breach wasn't so terrible as to prevent my being paid, though I did get a warning in my inbox, a single-line reminder. Only write in the Google Doc between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m. Next came a prompt about some kids encountering a Slenderman-esque figure. Ha, called it. Once again, I struggled with this common cliché. How to make it interesting? Maybe instead of a tall figure, I'd make the baddie short and squat, while still keeping with the disappearing kids theme. Unfortunately, even though I was eager to write, I had a lot of other things scheduled between 6 to 8 that week. When I messaged TSC to ask if the 2-hour window could be shifted, I was told no, but that I could take up to 2 weeks to finish the story and that would be fine. I was able to finish the story in the next week and got my payment. The next prompt was the absolute worst. I almost refused to write it. The narrator works as a security guard on the night shift, and strange things have begun happening. Oh, for crying out loud. Every other YouTube narration is about a security guard, always on the night shift, usually with strange rules. Between that and the FNAF franchise, isn't it time we bury this trope for good? And yet, the pay was fantastic for the amount of effort I was putting in, which was almost none. By now, the first couple narrations had already come out, with the third on the way, and the audience honestly seemed to enjoy the stories no matter how trope-filled and unoriginal. So fine, whatever. I was kinda glad my name wasn't attached now, because if it were, I'd have had to spell it SELLOUT. But my hatred of all these tropes led me to rebel in a different way. I stopped following all the guidelines. For example, I refused to check my closets. Would I still be paid? And I began writing at 5:58 p.m. Everything I typed at 5:58 was erased, and I got another warning. But the checking the closet thing didn't have any impact. I realized nobody was actually watching me check my closets. I could ignore that rule and the door one. The only thing being monitored was the Google Doc. I started breaking the rules pretty regularly after that, just as a small act of rebellion. Even refusing to include the signature statement in my latest story. It got added in after, I heard in the narration. I still got paid, but with a 10% deduction for forgetting the phrase. While I was writing these shittiest of creepypastas, part of me kept wondering, what's the point of having these silly rules? Why check the closet? Why call out to the collector? I still did this one because I thought it was funny. What was the significance of the weird phrase I always had to include? If I said it aloud, would it summon a demon? I did say it aloud, and nope. Was it all just roleplay? Were the creators of Pinefell that invested in their little universe? I supposed that must be it. Eccentric, but then plenty of podcasts have their own unique thing where listeners get to play along. All part of the fun. At least that's what I thought at the time. Until I woke up one morning and saw a local news article in my Reddit feed. You have to understand, I'm a hermit. I avoid social interaction as much as possible. And since I work remotely, I rarely hear about stuff happening. Especially lately, I've been tuning out the world, and when I'm not writing or working, I'm playing video games or watching YouTube. My point is, I was kind of up to date on some national or even international events because of social media chatter. But local news wasn't something I paid attention to. But the article that popped up in my Reddit feed caught my eye because it was so sensational. A man's dismembered body was found in a suitcase and lunchboxes scattered around an abandoned playground. My first thought was, shit, was this crime inspired by my writing? That had been the very first story, and it had debuted on the channel a couple weeks prior, so it was definitely possible. I went to the narration itself and found that while initially it had only a little over 1,000 views, it was now getting a lot more attention because apparently someone had noticed the connection to the news. I clicked a link to another article about the killing, and this one included a photograph of the playground where the suitcase had been found. As my eyes darted across the image, my heart dropped to my toes. It was a different photo, but the tall grass, the stained yellow plastic slide spiraling down from the playset. I recognized this play area. "Folk," I muttered. That was enough for me to reach out to the authorities. After reviewing the stories on the Scream Collector channel, the police discovered that there was a second story with striking similarities to recent murders. The bodies of 2 missing hikers had been found at a state park. Or rather, their skins had been found, piled beside the trail like husks of fruit. And what had stumped investigators was the fact one of the victims had nails painted pink. The sister-in-law of the victim with painted nails said she initially didn't believe it was her sister's remains, because her sister never wore nail polish. Never. The investigators concluded the polish was applied post-mortem, but couldn't understand why. Now they knew. It was so that their bodies matched the details in the story I wrote. It makes me sick. I'm terrified they'll find more victims. Children from the Slender Man story or a security guard from the overnight shift story. And it's my fault. My words were the inspiration. Let this post serve as a warning. Be careful about accepting commissions. Ghosts aren't real, and strange rules won't kill you. And most of what you hear in horror films or narrations isn't true. But I'm making this post here on Reddit, the so-called front page of the internet, to warn you that there are truly sick people out there. People who do their best to make horror stories become a reality. The Scream Collector hasn't been caught yet. I just want to forget my part in all this and get on with my life. Just pretend that I had nothing to do with any of it. But I know I need to share the truth. A warning. So I'm posting this here, and on her writing, and her true crime, and everywhere and anywhere to warn people of the danger. Oh, there's one more thing I haven't told you yet. That weird phrase I had to add into every story? Na ku oifi htakoti rut. The one I got penalized for leaving out? The investigators pretty quickly pieced together what it meant. I feel so stupid for not having seen it myself. They're quite sure it was meant for them, and for listeners in general, and maybe for me too, and that it was a taunt by the Scream Collector. If you read it aloud backwards, it says, "Try to catch me if you can." Oh God. It's been 4 weeks since I typed this all up, and I chickened out and didn't post it, but I just got a link to a new Google Doc and a message with a new prompt. Write a story about a serial killer who leaves clues in creepypastas. Eventually, investigators track down the clues to the writer, but when they show up at the writer's home, they find the writer already dead at the keyboard. See attached photo for inspiration. I opened the photo, and it's a picture of my living room. Folk. Me. I'm typing now. I've got the Google Doc open. It's currently 6 p.m. And I'm praying that if I seem to be typing like it's another story, the collector won't come for me yet. I've texted 911. I keep toggling between the Google Doc and this post. It's going live now. I'm broadcasting it everywhere. But folk me, I'm wondering about those rules I thought were random. Like how the nonsense phrase was a hint. Try to catch me if you can. And I wonder if the other rules also hinted at something I've been too slow to figure out. I wonder why I was told to always check my closet. Hi everyone. My friend was brutally murdered in her sleep this weekend. When the police found her, she was lying on top of her duvet covered in her own blood with a slit in her throat. No trace was found of her killer. Upon retrieving some things for her family today, I stumbled across her diary. What you will read below is her account of the last 7 days of her life. Monday, July 9th, 2018. Dear Diary? I guess? I don't really know how I'm supposed to start this thing. The therapist recommended I acquire some kind of journal to help catalog my thoughts. It's supposed to keep me grounded and in the present if I start to have another panic attack. So, here we are. It's Monday the 9th and I'm supposed to be at work right now, except I'm not. I moved house today to a new-build condo in a quiet suburban street. I had something of a mental breakdown earlier on this year that left me hyperventilating on the wrong side of the guardrail on the Golden Gate Bridge. It took 2 agonizing hours of talking to a police officer to convince me not to embrace the void and to choose life instead. I was then immediately whisked away to a hospital to be evaluated by a psychiatrist. The next day, I went home and immediately listed my apartment for sale. There were too many memories left there that I didn't want to keep, and I needed a fresh start. My new place is exactly what the doctor ordered. It's a modern, 2-up, 2-down, I think that's what it's called, townhouse. It really has all the things a growing millennial needs. USB ports in every outlet, high-speed Wi-Fi, good cell reception. I'm in love with the place. There's an open-plan kitchen and living area towards the back with these amazing floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors. These lead onto a cute little deck and a tiny patch of grass I'm told is called a lawn. I wouldn't know. I've only ever lived in apartments. Towards the front, there's a spare room which, until I have more money, is going to remain unfurnished. It will probably just end up as a storage closet for the stuff I couldn't leave behind me when I moved, but definitely don't have a need for. Heading upstairs, which is honestly more of a mezzanine, there's my bedroom and bathroom. The bedroom sits at the back of the house, above the deck, and the bathroom takes up the front. The whole place is wide open, spacious, and it lets the light in. It feels like my soul is taking a big breath of fresh air. I have a neighbor, and I'd assume that their house is a mirror image of mine. I've not met them yet, but I hope that I bump into them soon. A little human contact couldn't go far amiss in my new life. I guess I should go and unpack some more of my stuff. It should help to ease my anxieties about my new place if everything is in some kind of order. Do you say goodbye to a diary? I have absolutely no idea. There needs to be a guide about diary etiquette online somewhere. So it's like 10:30 p.m.-ish. I've just got back to my room after a frantic search around the house for my breaker box. Can you believe it? 12 hours in the house and I get a power cut. I fell asleep with the landing light on, and I guess the sudden absence of light woke me up. I jumped out of bed and initially thought I was blind. Suburbia is really dark at night. My eyes eventually adjusted enough to penetrate the darkness. I fumbled my way down the stairs into the kitchen and grabbed the flashlight off of the fridge. It's one of those cheap magnetic ones. I received it as a gift in a stocking one Christmas. I flicked it on and scanned the kitchen for the breaker box. It wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. It was in the spare bedroom, behind 4 boxes of my junk. I moved the boxes and lifted the lid to the breaker switches, but nothing had tripped. I was just thinking about which number I'd need to dial to get some kind of idea of the situation when there was a dull thud, followed by a sharp click. Confused, and out of sorts in unfamiliar surroundings, I held my breath for about 5 seconds, and then I heard the hum of the fridge. The power was back on. I emerged from the spare room into the partially illuminated kitchen and approached the fridge to reattach the flashlight. I thought I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye just as I was about to turn and head for the stairs. It looked like there was a figure out on the deck. I rushed for the outdoor light switch. It was one of those really bright halogen security lights. They're usually activated by proximity, but need to be reset in the event of a power cut. There was a burst of light onto the deck and the lawn behind it. There wasn't a trace of anything. No figure, no footsteps, not even any poop from an animal. Whatever shadow I thought I had seen evaporated like mist. I think I'm losing it again. Already. Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. Hello, diary. I apologize for my minor outburst last night. The internet tells me that what I experienced was a rolling blackout. and I guess my mind was just playing tricks on me. Today is my first day back at work after a week off, so I'm stressed and honestly a little anxious about that. I work as a graphical artist for a bank. I produce their advertisements and customer-facing posters and emails. It's really fun work, but there are tight deadlines and I'm constantly trying to please everyone. Hopefully, my first day back isn't quite so intense. With a bit of luck, I won't have to endure another power cut tonight. Diary, there's a footprint on my deck. Not a set or a trail of footprints, just one enormous muddy boot print right outside the sliding doors. If I were to put my foot where the print sits and close the doors, my toe would be pressed right against them. Someone stood at my door. I didn't catch it last night because it was dark and the deck is stained a deep chestnut color. I don't know what to do. I've called the police, but they completely dismissed me. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing we can do without an intruder actually present. I called my friend, Matt, to stay over for the night. He said he'll crash on the couch, which makes me feel a little more secure. I think if I can spend one night in the house without a disturbance, I'll feel better. At the end of the day, it was one boot print. It might have been there before I even moved in for all I know. I'll have forgotten all about it in the morning. Wish me luck, diary. I'm turning in for the night. Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. Good morning, diary. I slept like a log last night. No nightmares featuring big-footed, muddy intruders inexplicably appearing on my deck. I found Matt sat at my breakfast bar upon my arrival to the kitchen. He claims he didn't experience anything out of the ordinary last night aside from some creaking in the house. With it being a new build, I'm willing to put this down to the house settling or me turning over in my sleep. I'm feeling incredibly positive today. I'm falling in love with the new house, I'm starting to feel safe, and I've just had breakfast and coffee before work for the first time in years. I'll be late home from work tonight. I've been invited for drinks with some colleagues as a sort of welcome back celebration. It'll be nice to get out of my head for a while, even if it is aided by alcohol. Thursday, July 12th, 2018. The back door was open this morning. I came downstairs to get a glass of water and some painkillers to alleviate the headache I had as a result of last night's antics. A thoroughly deserved headache, I might add. I felt the cool morning air raise goose pimples on my neck and make the hairs on my arms stand on end before I reached the bottom of the stairs and located the source of the chill as I rounded the corner. I don't remember much of last night after getting home, but I'm fairly confident I didn't touch the door. I'm not a smoker, and I haven't owned a pet for years, so there was no logical reason for me to have opened the back door last night at all, let alone leave it wide open. I'm going to the hardware store immediately to pick up new, heavy-duty locks, and I've got a locksmith arriving later on this afternoon to install them. I have an appointment scheduled with a security company later on this week to get an alarm system installed with a remote panic button. This situation is slowly deteriorating into something that I can't explain away as month-old footprints and strange sleeping behaviors. I'm going to go around to the neighbor and see if they've heard or experienced anything similar. I'd definitely feel better if I have a nearby friendly face that I can turn to for support. I can't keep calling Matt every time I make a stupid mistake when I've had one too many daiquiris. I don't think anybody lives next door. I knocked on the door and rang the doorbell, which still worked, surprisingly, and received no answer. After some observation, the house was absolutely spotless, externally and internally. I'm not sure that it was ever inhabited. Every window on the ground floor is covered with a pair of heavy blackout curtains except for one, the front room. Peering through the window, I could make out a solitary wooden chair in the middle of the room, facing the window. I saw no evidence of any other furniture, past or present. There were no indentations on the carpet, no empty boxes, no discoloration on the walls. It looked as if the house had remained untouched since it was built earlier this year. I don't feel comfortable about this at all. Something just doesn't feel right. I'm going to ask some of the other people in the neighborhood about the house and see if they can shine some light on this for me. In the meantime, I'm going to invest in a safety chain for my front door. I don't feel safe anymore. Friday, July 13th, 2018. Friday the 13th. One of only 2 unlucky days this year. I'd like to say that I don't believe in superstition, especially as my therapist believes that it doesn't have positive effects on my mental health. However, today has been extremely negative for me. My declining attention at work has caused them to put me on a short stress leave. My supervisor believes that I may have returned to work a little too soon, and so I've been told to take this Saturday and the entirety of next week off to get my shit together. I think I'm just going to spend the entire time in bed. I don't have the energy for anything else. My locksmith hasn't been able to get out to my house yet either. It's apparently break-in season, whatever that means, and he's been snowed under with lock changes. I've bought and attached a safety chain to my door. It's funny, I don't even know what I'm trying to keep out at this point. I just want to feel comfortable in my new home. It happened again. There's no way this is a coincidence. 2 power cuts in 5 days in a new build? I can't rationally explain this away. I wasn't even asleep this time. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling and fantasizing about the Golden Gate Bridge when my thoughts were rudely interrupted by a sharp click and a dull thud from outside. I was plunged into almost complete darkness and started to panic. My heart started pounding like it was attempting to crack open my sternum and escape my chest. My breathing became shallow and rapid like oxygen was suddenly in short supply and I needed every molecule that was available to me. I sat bolt upright, no longer in my stupor, but suddenly very alert. I listened hard for any sound that might seem out of the ordinary. I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own breathing and the constant pounding drumbeat in my chest. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and gingerly dropped my feet onto the carpet. I had recently relocated the flashlight to my bedside drawer, and I hastily retrieved it. After a few seconds of fumbling around with shaky hands, I found the on switch, and the darkness gave way to an orange glow that now felt familiar and offered a tiny scrap of comfort for my jangled nerves. There was a creak from downstairs. I entered the landing and listened with bated breath. I wasn't sure if I was preparing to run or to club an assailant with my tiny flashlight, but I was prepared for something. No sounds. I crept down the stairs, one at a time, listening for the faintest sound. After 5 minutes of silence, I was satisfied that my kitchen was free of intruders. I approached the back door and gave the latch a solid tug. It was locked tight. I headed to the front door and ensured the safety chain was still secure. My final stop was to check the spare room for the breakers. I'd left the boxes out of the way from last time. If I'm honest, I haven't had the energy to rearrange or unpack them. Unsurprisingly, the switches were all up. In my complete panic, I had dialed 911. Feeling my cheeks flush a little with embarrassment, and regretting having been so hasty, I retired to the couch to await the arrival of the police, and thought of what I would tell them to convince them I wasn't either crazy or wasting their time. The police arrived with a knock at the door. I approached cautiously and opened a tiny crack, through which I could check that they were actually police. When I was sure, I carefully slid back the safety chain and eased the door open for them to come in and search the house for intruders. They seemed distracted with something else, and as if they had better things to be doing, which they probably did. Their search was basic, checking under beds, in wardrobes, with just a cursory glance into the bathroom. I was left with a copy of a police report and the instructions to dial 911 again if I felt unsafe. Sleep came for me there on the couch around 2 a.m. and I awoke with a start just now at 5:35. I'm tired and I need coffee. Folk this house, diary. Saturday, July 14th, 2018. It's around 4 p.m. now and I'm too tired to function. Still no word from the locksmith or the security company. I'm not sure this police report will protect me if push comes to shove. I spent the past few hours on the phone making plans to get out of here. I have an Airbnb from tomorrow and 5 apartment viewings this week. I'll have to rent this place out and write off my plans of my dream home. I'm going to pack everything I need and get an early night. I'm leaving very early tomorrow as I have a pretty decent drive to make. On the move again. I hope this isn't going to be a reoccurring theme for me. Sunday, July 15th, 2018. Hi there. Diary. I did not move out this morning. I found myself unable to leave my bed and unavailable to answer the phone. I made some mistakes this week, diary. I think it was good that I bought a security chain for the door. It's smart, cheap, and simple. Double-checking doors and windows is also a great plan when one fears an intruder. The security system would have proven to be overpriced and ineffective had it arrived before my departure. The new fancy deadbolt would have appeared to have been of little use also. These things only serve to keep intruders out. My first mistake was checking in on the house next door. I forgot to lock my door. Or maybe it didn't occur to me as necessary. I was only feet away, right? What could possibly happen? My second mistake was falling asleep on the sofa yesterday morning. It was careless. I was exhausted from my ordeal, and after seeing off the police officers, I'd neglected to reset the chain on the door. My final mistake was being so loud on my phone throughout the day on Saturday. Anybody could have heard my plans to leave, and so quickly, too. It was almost like I was fleeing. That would have been smart. You see, I was right in my Friday panic. There was a reason to be scared. He was hiding behind the shower curtain. The police didn't see the muddy print on the floor, nor did they see the sprinkles of dirt on the bath mat. They didn't even turn the light on. When I left for coffee, my uninvited house guest crept under my bed and waited. When I retired to bed early, he waited for my breathing to become slow and deep. He then emerged, slowly and silently. He rose up beside the bed like a ghoul and produced a blade. A beautiful thing, obsessively cleaned and meticulously maintained. The blade was pressed against my throat for a brief second before it glided across and all my blood spilled out. I gasped for breath. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. With my eyes wide and my hands clasping at my throat, trying in vain to staunch the crimson flow. I'd imagine my last thought was a wish that I'd spent a little extra cash and got that Airbnb one night earlier. My life faded, and I collapsed, motionless, on top of my duvet. The man then reached under my mattress, produced my diary, and proceeded to fill in my final day. Wouldn't it be such a shame if I'd ended the week on a Saturday? If you are reading this, maybe check behind your shower curtain before locking yourself in for the night. Me and my husband have fallen into retirement in our early 60s and have quite a large house for empty nesters. We decided long ago to turn our garage into a guest house, but unfortunately it remains quite empty as family lives very close and there is no need for them to stay overnight. We decided why not make passive income and rent our guest house out through Airbnb. The guest house is accessible through the back driveway. You enter through the patio doors at check-in, and the guest house entrance is inside the patio pool area. The main house is attached to the pool, but the windows are heavily tinted, and if a guest has booked a stay, they're the only ones to use it. We've been hosting on Airbnb for almost a year now, and I've grown to hate it. Our house rules are no drugs, no smoking inside, no animals, no parties, no loud noises after 11. That's it. And somehow these young couples keep breaking almost every single one of them. I could tolerate these guests' bad habits, and usually I just told myself it was worth it because of how much money we were making, but this couple is honestly the worst. A couple in their early 20s booked a night away for Mother's Day with their baby. They parked in the wrong spot. They were arguing the whole time they carried their things to the guest house. All was well, but they decided to go for the pool right away. The windows to the main house were open, and the young woman was wearing barely anything more than floss as a swimsuit. And they let their baby in our hot tub, which I find careless. They left the pool area a wreck and got food all over the patio. While using the grill, they kept violently letting it slam shut. We have cameras in every room. I'm watching her now, sitting on the couch, no pants or underwear, while changing. Disgusting. Who sits on a stranger's couch with no clothing? Young adults these days have no decency, no modesty. They deserve what they get. They put the baby to sleep in a pack and play, and the young man began to roll marijuana into a cigar in the same room as the child. Appalling. They went outside to smoke and left the poor child unsupervised. I made sure to watch him extra carefully on the camera. The baby woke up and the young man went inside to tend to him, while the woman kept smoking. This was my chance. This boy deserves a better life. I grabbed the biggest knife I had from the kitchen. I hope I still know how to do this. It's been a long time. I mustered all my courage and opened the door to the patio very, very slowly. Thankfully, she was listening to music, even though it's past 11, and didn't hear me slip up and let the door freak a bit. I walked very slowly, which is a lot harder now that I'm so old. I made my way behind her undetected. She looked up to the sky to blow smoke, and I struck quickly. The blade was freshly sharpened, just in case, and went through her throat rather smoothly. It did hurt my elbow a bit to move so swiftly, but nothing some potassium wouldn't fix. She went quietly. I mean, how can you scream when your throat isn't whole, right? Now the young man. Oh, I hate it when I act out of anger. I never think these things through. Oh well, it must be done now. I had a great idea. I swiveled the girl's patio chair around to where her back was facing the door. I hid behind the door and waited for him to come out for her. It took what felt like hours. But he finally came out. The automatic patio lights came on and he saw all the blood on the ground and her head laying limp in the chair. He immediately screamed and ran to her. As he got to the chair, I walked right up to him and stabbed his jugular. He looked shocked as I pulled my knife out of him. He fell forward on top of his partner. I set my knife down on the table in front of them and went inside the guest house, washed myself up a bit, and checked on the baby. Sound asleep in the playpen. Oh, how I hated being an empty nest. And how I hated those Airbnb guests. I guess in the end, Howard was right. My temper does get the best of me. Oh, is he ever going to be mad that it happened again? He isn't as young as he used to be. I know the cleanup won't be so easy. But I know he'll be so happy we have another little one. A sweet baby boy. Tomorrow, I must get this room and the back patio tidied up. We have guests coming at dawn. I've always been a sucker for adventure, but I never thought it would lead me here. Sitting in a dimly lit cabin in the Icelandic wilderness, questioning my sanity and wondering if I'll live to see another sunrise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, back when this was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. It was Olga's idea, really. My girlfriend of 3 years had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights, and when she found an unbelievably cheap Airbnb listing in a small village near Viturvatn, she was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. "Come on, Jake," she'd said, her blue eyes sparkling. "When are we ever going to get another chance like this?" I couldn't argue with her logic or her enthusiasm. So, 2 weeks later, we found ourselves on a tiny propeller plane, descending towards an airstrip that looked more like a gravelly back road than an actual runway. The village of Arbaki wasn't much to look at. A handful of colorful houses dotted the landscape, their paint faded and chipped from years of harsh Icelandic winters. The few locals we passed on our way to the Airbnb regarded us with a mixture of curiosity and, was that concern? Our rental car, a beat-up Subaru that had seen better days, struggled up the winding dirt road leading to our cabin. As we crested the final hill, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid air outside. The cabin stood alone, a weathered wooden structure that seemed to grow out of the rocky landscape like some kind of misshapen tree. Thick forests loomed on 3 sides, their branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. To the south, the glassy surface of Vitarvatn reflected the overcast sky, creating an illusion of endless gray. "It's quaint," Olga said, her voice faltering slightly. I could tell she was trying to maintain her excitement, but something about the place had dampened her spirits. I forced a smile. "Hey, it's all part of the adventure, right?" We grabbed our bags and made our way to the front door. A gust of wind whipped around us, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. Something acrid and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. The key was hidden under a loose floorboard, just as the owner had promised. As I turned it in the lock, the door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The interior of the cabin was unexpected. While the outside looked like it had been abandoned for years, the inside was immaculately clean and surprisingly modern. A plush couch faced a stone fireplace, and the small kitchen gleamed with new appliances. "Wow," Olga breathed, her earlier apprehension seemingly forgotten. "This is actually really nice." I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards seemed to groan under our weight, or how the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should be. As Olga explored the cabin, oohing and ahing over the decor, I found myself drawn to a small bookshelf in the corner. Most of the titles were in Icelandic, their spines cracked and worn with age. But one book stood out, a thin volume bound in dark leather, with no title or author listed. I reached for it, my fingers barely brushing the spine when a sharp crack of thunder made me jump. Outside, the sky had darkened considerably, and fat droplets of rain began to pelt the windows. "Looks like we got here just in time," Olga said, coming up behind me and wrapping her arms around my waist. "Want to light a fire and open that bottle of wine we brought?" I smiled and turned to kiss her, pushing my unease to the back of my mind. We were here to relax and have fun, after all. What could possibly go wrong? As I built the fire and Olga uncorked the wine, neither of us noticed the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance in the corners of the room. Nor did we hear the faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that might have been the wind, or might have been something far more sinister. "Welcome," it seemed to say. "We've been waiting for you." The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We cooked a simple dinner of pasta and local fish, the unfamiliar spices filling the cabin with an aromatic haze. As we ate, Olga chatted excitedly about our plans for the week: hiking, visiting hot springs, and of course, hunting for the elusive northern lights. "I read that the locals have all sorts of folklore about the lights," she said, her eyes gleaming with interest. "They say they're the spirits of the dead, dancing in the sky." I forced a chuckle. Let's hope we don't run into any of those spirits then. After dinner, we settled onto the couch, the crackling fire casting long shadows across the room. The wind outside had picked up, howling around the eaves of the cabin like a wounded animal. I pulled Olga closer, trying to focus on the warmth of her body rather than the growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. "Tell me a story," Olga murmured, her head resting on my chest. "Something scary. It's perfect for a night like this." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to feed the creeping dread that had been building since we arrived, but Olga looked up at me with those big blue eyes and I found myself giving in. "All right," I said, racking my brain for a suitable tale. "Have you ever heard of the Icelandic hidden people?" Olga shook her head, snuggling closer. "Well, legend has it that there are invisible beings living all around us in Iceland. They look just like humans, but they can only be seen by those with the gift, or by those they choose to reveal themselves to." As I spoke, the fire seemed to dim, the shadows in the room growing deeper. I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. They say the hidden people live in rocks and hills, and that they don't take kindly to humans disturbing their homes. There are stories of construction projects being sabotaged, of workers falling ill or machines breaking down mysteriously. A loud crack from the fire made us both jump. For a moment, I thought I saw a face in the flames, angular and inhuman, with eyes that burned with an otherworldly light. But then I blinked, and it was gone. "Some people even claim to have been invited into the hidden people's homes," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper now. "They describe feasts of unimaginable luxury, music that makes your very soul want to dance, but there's always a catch. Time moves differently in their world, and what feels like a few hours can be years in our world. People have gone missing for decades, only to return without having aged a day." As I finished speaking, an eerie silence fell over the cabin. Even the wind seemed to have died down. Olga shivered against me. "Maybe that wasn't the best bedtime story," she said with a nervous laugh. I forced a smile. "Yeah, sorry about that. It's just a silly legend, though, nothing to worry about." But as we got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that by telling that story, I had somehow invited something into our little cabin. Something old and patient and hungry. That night, I dreamed of dancing lights in the sky, of shadowy figures moving just out of sight, and of a voice calling my name from the depths of the lake. When I woke with a start in the middle of the night, heart pounding, I could have sworn I saw Olga standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me with unblinking eyes. But when I blinked and looked again, she was asleep beside me, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. It was just a dream, I told myself as I tried to go back to sleep. Just a dream, and nothing more. But deep down, I knew that our adventure in Iceland was only just beginning, and that the true horrors were still waiting to reveal themselves. I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was just the wind against the cabin's weathered exterior, but as I lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, I realized it was coming from inside the room. Steady, rhythmic, scratch, scratch, scratch. I rolled over, reaching for Olga, but my hand met cold, empty sheets. My heart rate quickened as I sat up, squinting into the gloom. "Olga?" The scratching stopped abruptly. Then, from the far corner of the room, I heard her voice. "I'm here, Jake!" I fumbled for the bedside lamp, my fingers clumsy with sleep and a growing sense of unease. When the light finally clicked on, I had to bite back a scream. Olga was crouched in the corner, her back to me. She was wearing the white nightgown she'd packed for the trip, but it was now streaked with dirt and what looked disturbingly like blood. Her long blonde hair hung in tangled clumps around her face. "Olga, what the hell?" I managed to choke out. "Are you okay?" Slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, she turned to face me. Her blue eyes, usually so full of warmth and life, were dull and unfocused. A trickle of dark fluid, please let it be dirt, not blood, ran from the corner of her mouth. "I'm fine, Jake," she said, her voice oddly flat. "I was just hungry." It was then that I noticed the deep gouges in the wooden floorboards where she'd been crouching, as if she'd been clawing at the floor like an animal. I was out of the bed in an instant, crossing the room to her. "Jesus, Olga, your hands!" Her fingernails were torn and bloody, splinters embedded in the soft flesh of her fingertips. She looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time, a small frown creasing her forehead. "Oh," she said, "I didn't notice." I helped her to her feet, trying to ignore the way she seemed to twitch and jerk, her movements unnatural and jerky. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." As I led her to the bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Olga had always been a sound sleeper. She'd never sleepwalked or had night terrors before. Was it the stress of travel, the altitude, or was it something else entirely? I sat her on the edge of the tub and began to gently clean her hands with warm water and soap. She remained eerily silent, her gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. When I finally worked up the courage to look behind me, there was nothing there but the plain white wall of the bathroom. "Olga," I said softly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What happened? What were you doing?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, slowly, her eyes focused on mine. "I heard them calling, Jake, from under the floor. They're so hungry." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's hungry, Olga? There's no one here but us." A smile spread across her face, too wide, showing too many teeth. "The hidden people, Jake. Remember the story you told? They're here. They've always been here." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her she was just having a bad dream, when a loud thump from the main room of the cabin made us both jump. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or like something was trying to break through the floor. Olga's head snapped towards the sound, her whole body going rigid. Then, before I could stop her, she was on her feet and running. I cursed, scrambling after her, but she was inhumanly fast. By the time I made it back to the bedroom, she was already disappearing down the narrow stairs to the main floor. "Olga, wait!" I took the stairs two at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The main room of the cabin was in chaos. Books had been pulled from the shelves and scattered across the floor. The couch cushions were overturned, stuffing spilling out as if some animal had been at them. And there, in the center of it all, stood Olga. She was perfectly still, her back to me, facing the stone fireplace. As I watched, paralyzed with fear and confusion, she slowly raised her arms out to her sides. "Do you hear them, Jake?" she whispered, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "They're singing." And then, to my horror, she began to rise off the ground. Inch by inch, defying every law of physics I knew, Olga levitated until she was a full foot off the floor. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out, to flee this cursed cabin and never look back. But I couldn't leave her. Whatever was happening, whatever had taken hold of the woman I loved, I had to try to save her. "Olga," I said, taking a cautious step forward. "Olga, please, come down. You're scaring me." She turned in midair, her movements fluid and unnaturally graceful. Her eyes, when they met mine, were black as pitch. "Don't be afraid, Jake," she said, and her voice echoed strangely, as if multiple people were speaking at once. "They just want to play." Suddenly, every light in the cabin went out. In the pitch darkness, I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. The skittering of countless unseen things, moving across the floor. The walls, the ceiling. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. When I finally managed to turn on the flashlight, I almost wished I hadn't. The beam illuminated Olga, now standing directly in front of me. Her skin was pale as milk, dark veins visible beneath the surface. Her hair writhed around her head as if blown by some unfelt wind. And her smile, God, her smile was impossibly wide, stretching literally from ear to ear. "Welcome to the dance, Jake," she said, and then she was moving towards me, her feet not touching the ground, her arms outstretched as if to embrace me. I stumbled backwards, tripping over the scattered debris on the floor. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows behind Olga, twisted, inhuman shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. My back hit the front door, and I scrabbled for the handle, my eyes never leaving the approaching figure of what used to be my girlfriend. Just as her ice-cold fingers brushed my cheek, I managed to wrench the door open. I tumbled out into the pre-dawn chill, gasping for air. Behind me, I heard Olga's laughter, high and wild and utterly inhuman. "You can't run, Jake," her voice called from the darkness of the cabin. "They're everywhere. They're in the earth, in the air, in the water. They're in your blood now. You're part of the dance." I ran. God help me. I ran into the woods surrounding the cabin, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped, bent double and gasping for air, I realized two terrible things. First, I had no idea where I was. The dense forest looked the same in every direction, no sign of the cabin or the road visible. And second, the sun was starting to rise, illuminating a thick, unnatural mist that was rolling in from all sides. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, I saw shapes moving in that mist. Humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that no human body could match. From somewhere in the distance, I heard Olga's voice carried on the wind. "Come back, Jake. The hidden people want to meet you." I knew then that our vacation had become a nightmare from which there might be no waking. Whatever had taken hold of Olga, whatever forces we had unwittingly stirred up, they weren't going to let us go easily. As the mist closed in around me, bringing with it whispers and laughter that no human throat could produce, I realized that this was only the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. I don't know how long I wandered in those mist-shrouded woods. Time seemed to lose all meaning, stretching and contracting like a living thing. The sun never fully rose, trapped in an eternal, sickly dawn that cast long, writhing shadows among the trees. Eventually, exhausted and disoriented, I found myself back at the cabin. It loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to keep running until I collapsed, but I knew it was pointless. Whatever had taken hold here, whatever had possessed Olga, it wouldn't let me escape so easily. With trembling hands, I pushed open the front door. The interior was dark, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood and something else, something older and fouler. "Olga?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. A giggle echoed from upstairs, high-pitched and childlike. It was Olga's voice, but not her laugh. Never her laugh. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath my feet. The bedroom door was ajar, pale light spilling out into the hallway. I pushed it open, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Olga sat in the center of the bed, her legs folded beneath her. She was completely naked, her pale skin covered in intricate patterns drawn in what looked horribly like blood. Her hair hung in matted clumps around her face, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were solid black. "Welcome home, Jake," she said, her voice a horrifying mixture of her own and something ancient and inhuman. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the doorframe. "Olga, please," I begged. "What's happening to you? To us?" She cocked her head to one side, the movement unnaturally fluid. "Happening? Oh, Jake, it's already happened. We're part of them now, part of the dance." As she spoke, I noticed movement behind her. The shadows on the wall were shifting, forming into humanoid shapes that writhed and twisted in impossible ways. I blinked hard, praying it was just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me. But when I opened my eyes, the shadow figures were still there, and they were getting clearer. Olga stood up on the bed, her movements jerky and puppet-like. "They want to show you, Jake. They want you to see." Before I could react, she launched herself at me with inhuman speed. Her body slammed into mine, sending us both tumbling down the stairs. We hit the bottom hard, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the main room. Olga was straddling me, her face inches from mine. Her breath smelled of rot and decay. "Open your eyes, Jake," she hissed. "Really open them." And then, to my horror, she began to peel back her own eyelids. But instead of stopping, the skin kept coming, peeling away from her face like a mask. I tried to scream, to push her off, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch in mute terror as Olga's face fell away, revealing something underneath that my mind wouldn't comprehend. It was as if reality itself was tearing, the familiar features of my girlfriend giving way to a writhing mass of shadows and teeth and eyes that shouldn't exist. And yet, somehow, I knew it was still Olga, or what Olga had become. "Do you see now?" the thing wearing Olga's skin asked. "Do you understand?" And God help me, I did. In that moment, I saw beyond the veil of our reality. I saw the hidden people, the creatures that lurked just out of sight. They were beautiful and terrible, ancient beyond imagining, and hungry, so hungry. I saw how thin the barrier between our world and theirs truly was, how the northern lights were really the after-images of their movements, bleeding through into our realm, how they had been watching us, waiting for the right moment to break through. And I saw how Olga and I had been chosen, how our arrival at this cursed cabin had been the final key to unlocking the door between worlds. The vision lasted an eternity and no time at all. When it faded, I found myself able to move again. I scrambled backward, putting distance between myself and the thing that had been Olga. It, watched me with amusement. "Running won't help, Jake. You're already part of us. You just don't know it yet." As if to prove her point, she suddenly darted forward, moving faster than any human possibly could. But instead of attacking me, she ran straight up the wall, defying gravity as she scurried across the ceiling like some monstrous insect. I watched in horrified fascination as she contorted her body in impossible ways, bones cracking and reforming as she twisted herself into shapes that should have been fatal. All the while, she laughed, that high, childlike giggle that was so wrong coming from her mouth. "Join us, Jake," she called from her perch on the ceiling. "Dance with us." I made a break for the door, but before I could reach it, Olga dropped down in front of me. She moved like a marionette with tangled strings, her limbs bending at unnatural angles. "You can't leave," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "The hidden people have such wonderful games to play." And then, to my utter disbelief and horror, she began to do something I can only describe as turning herself inside out. It was as if her skin was becoming translucent, revealing the writhing, shadowy mass beneath. I caught glimpses of organs that were not human, of bones that shifted and changed shape. I couldn't take it anymore. With a scream of pure terror, I shoved past her and burst out of the cabin. I ran blindly into the misty woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But no matter how far or fast I ran, I couldn't escape the sound of Olga's laughter, nor the whispers of the hidden people that seemed to come from the very air around me. As I ran, I began to notice strange things. The trees seemed to move, their branches reaching out as if to grab me. The ground beneath my feet felt soft and yielding, like it might swallow me up at any moment. And everywhere I looked, I caught glimpses of dark shapes flitting just at the edge of my vision. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning in this nightmare realm. But eventually, exhausted beyond measure, I stumbled and fell. As I lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath, I heard footsteps approaching. Soft, measured steps that could only belong to one person. Olga emerged from the mist, but she was no longer even pretending to be human. Her body was a constantly shifting mass of shadows and light, vaguely humanoid but wrong in ways I couldn't begin to describe. Only her eyes remained recognizable, 2 points of deep blue in a face that was no longer a face. "Oh, Jake," she said, and her voice was a chorus of whispers. "Why do you keep running? Don't you want to be with me? Don't you want to be part of something greater?" As she spoke, the mist around us began to coalesce, forming into shapes that my mind recoiled from. The hidden people were revealing themselves at last, and I knew that once I truly saw them, there would be no going back. Olga reached out a hand, or what passed for a hand in her new form, towards me. "Join us, Jake. Be with me forever. All you have to do is say yes." I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I thought of the Olga I had known, the woman I had loved. I thought of our life together, of all our plans and dreams, and I thought of the horror that had consumed her, that was now offering to consume me as well. In that moment, teetering on the edge of an abyss I could barely comprehend, I made my choice. I opened my eyes, looked directly into the swirling vortex that had once been Olga's face, and said, I opened my eyes, looked directly into the swirling vortex that had once been Olga's face, and said, no. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. For a moment, everything was still. Then the forest erupted into chaos. The shadows surrounding us writhed and twisted, taking on monstrous forms. The ground beneath my feet began to undulate like the surface of a stormy sea. And Olga, or the thing that had been Olga, let out a scream that shattered reality itself. Her body began to shift and change, growing larger, more monstrous. Limbs sprouted from limbs, eyes opened where no eyes should be. She was becoming something beyond comprehension, a living nightmare that threatened to consume everything. You can't say no, Jake, her voice boomed, now a cacophony of 1,000 screaming souls. You're already part of us. You've always been part of us. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to run, but there was nowhere to go. The forest had become a writhing mass of shadows and teeth, closing in on all sides. I could feel the hidden people pressing against the barriers of reality, trying to break through. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I saw it, a glimmer of light barely visible through the twisting shadows. Without thinking, I lunged for it, my hand closing around something small and cold. It was the key to the cabin, the one we'd found under the loose floorboard what felt like a lifetime ago. As my fingers touched it, a jolt of energy surged through me. Suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I turned to face the monstrosity that had once been my girlfriend. "You're right, Olga," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am part of this, but not in the way you think." Before the creature could react, I plunged the key into my own chest. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and all-consuming, but with the pain came clarity. I could feel the power of this place, the ancient magic that bound the hidden people to our world. And I could feel how to unravel it. As blood poured from my wound, I began to speak. The words weren't mine, they were older than language itself, a primal sound that resonated with the very fabric of reality. With each syllable, I could feel the bonds weakening, the veil between worlds growing thinner. The creature that had been Olga lunged at me, its form shifting and changing with each movement, but it was too late. With a final, guttural cry, I completed the incantation. The world exploded. Reality itself seemed to fracture. Shards of what was and what could be swirling around us in a maelstrom of cosmic energy. I could see glimpses of other worlds, other times. Prehistoric beasts roaming vast plains, futuristic cities gleaming under alien suns, and things so strange I couldn't begin to describe them. And through it all, I could see the hidden people. They were being torn from our world, pulled back into whatever dark dimension they had come from. They fought against it, their inhuman screams echoing across realities, but it was futile. The creature that had been Olga was the last to go. As the vortex of energy pulled at her monstrous form, I caught a final glimpse of the woman I had loved. For just a moment, her eyes cleared, and I saw recognition there. Fear. Regret. "Jake," she whispered, her voice her own again. "I'm sorry." And then she was gone, swallowed up by the collapsing portal between worlds. The maelstrom of energy intensified, and I felt myself being pulled apart at the molecular level. Every atom of my being was on fire, scattered across a million realities. I was everywhere and nowhere, every when and never when. In that moment of cosmic awareness, I understood. The cabin, the hidden people, Olga and I, we had all been part of something larger, a cosmic dance that had been playing out since the dawn of time, and now, with my sacrifice, the dance was changing. As the last of the energy dissipated, I found myself back in the forest. But it was different now. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by the natural beauty of the Icelandic wilderness. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I looked down at my chest, expecting to see the gaping wound where I'd plunged the key. But there was nothing there, not even a scar. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and the unfamiliar environment. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the base of a nearby tree, was a small pile of dirt, and half buried in that dirt was a human tooth. With trembling hands, I dug into the soft earth. More teeth, fragments of bone, and scraps of familiar fabric, the remains of Olga's nightgown. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Olga was gone. She had been gone for days, maybe even since that first night. The thing I had been interacting with, the monster she had become. It had all been a manifestation of the hidden people's power. They had used her death, her decomposing body, as an anchor to our world, and I had been their unwitting pawn, my grief and confusion feeding their strength. As the full weight of what had happened settled over me, I began to laugh. It was a broken, hysterical sound that echoed through the now peaceful forest. I laughed until I cried, and then I cried until I had no tears left. When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't leave Olga here, in this cursed place, and I couldn't risk anyone else stumbling upon this cabin and awakening whatever remnants of the hidden people's power might still linger. I spent the next few hours digging a proper grave for Olga, laying her remains to rest as best I could. Then, with grim determination, I returned to the cabin. It looked innocent enough in the morning light, just another quaint vacation rental. But I could feel the wrongness of it, the echo of cosmic horrors that had played out within its walls. I found a can of kerosene in a shed behind the cabin. It didn't take long to douse the interior, making sure to soak the floorboards thoroughly. As I worked, I could have sworn I heard whispers. Faint echoes of the hidden people, perhaps, or just the ghosts of my own traumatized psyche. When I was done, I stood at the threshold of the cabin one last time. "I'm sorry, Olga," I whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Then I struck a match and tossed it inside. The flames caught quickly, hungrily devouring the dry wood. I watched as the fire spread, consuming the cabin and all the horrors it contained. Black smoke billowed into the clear morning sky, carrying with it the last vestiges of the hidden people's influence. As the heat became unbearable, I turned and began the long walk back to civilization. I knew that no one would believe my story. How could they? I barely believed it myself. But as I made my way down the winding road, away from the burning cabin and the grave of the woman I had loved, I swore I could hear music on the wind, a haunting, beautiful melody that spoke of ancient powers and cosmic dances. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this wasn't really the end. The hidden people were gone, banished back to whatever dark corner of reality they had come from. But there were other powers out there, other dances yet to be danced. And somewhere, in some reality, Olga was still screaming my name. It's been 6 months since I walked away from that burning cabin in Iceland. 6 months of sleepless nights, of jumping at shadows, of questioning my own sanity. I'm back home now, trying to piece together some semblance of a normal life. But how do you go back to normal after dancing with cosmic horrors? The official story is that Olga and I were caught in a freak storm. That she fell into a ravine, and I, delirious from hypothermia, wandered for days before being found by search and rescue. It's a neat, tidy explanation that everyone seems happy to accept, everyone except me. I've tried therapy, tried support groups for those dealing with trauma and loss. But how do you explain to a room full of strangers that your girlfriend was possessed by ancient, otherworldly beings, that you unraveled the fabric of reality to banish them? They'd lock me up and throw away the key, so I smile and nod and tell them what they want to hear. Yes, I'm processing my grief. No, I don't blame myself anymore. Yes, I'm sleeping better these days. Lies, all of it. But necessary lies, I tell myself. The truth is too big, too terrible to share. But the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how hard you try to patch them. It started small, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned to look. The feeling of being watched when I was alone in my apartment. Dreams of vast, dark spaces filled with writhing shadows and echoing whispers. I told myself it was just PTSD, my mind's way of processing the unprocessable. But deep down, I knew better. The dance wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. 3 months after Iceland, I woke in the middle of the night to find my bedroom filled with a shimmering, ethereal light. Like the northern lights, but inside, impossible. As I watched, frozen in terror, shapes began to form in the light. Humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that defied physics. And in the center of it all, a familiar figure. Olga, or something wearing her shape. She reached out to me, her fingers elongating into impossible, shadowy tendrils. "Jake," she whispered, her voice a chorus of 1,000 souls. "We're still dancing. We'll always be dancing." I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. The lights vanished, the figures with them. But the damage was done. The barrier between worlds, the one I thought I had sealed, was still permeable, still thin. After that night, the incidents became more frequent. Objects in my apartment would move on their own. I'd catch glimpses of impossible geometries and reflective surfaces, and always the whispers. Promises of power, of knowledge beyond human comprehension. Threats of what would happen if I refused their call. I tried to run, moved to a new city, changed my name, cut off all contact with my old life. But they always found me. In the end, I realized there was nowhere I could go that they couldn't follow. The hidden people were a part of me now, their essence intertwined with mine in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Which brings me to now, to why I'm writing this all down. Yesterday, I saw Olga again. Not in a dream, not in some otherworldly vision, but in the flesh. I was walking down a crowded street when I saw her across the road. She looked exactly as she had the day we left for Iceland, all smiles and bright eyes. For a moment, just a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. I called out her name, started to cross the street towards her, and then she changed. It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second, she was Olga, my Olga. The next, she was something else. Her body elongated, limbs twisting into impossible shapes. Her face split open, revealing a writhing mass of shadows and teeth. And her eyes, God, her eyes were windows into a void so vast and terrible it made my soul shrink. No one else on the street seemed to notice. They walked around the monstrous thing wearing Olga's skin, their eyes sliding past as if it wasn't even there. As if the laws of reality hadn't just been shattered on a busy downtown sidewalk. The thing that wasn't Olga raised a hand, monsieur, or what passed for a hand in its twisted form, and beckoned to me. Its mouth opened, and I heard its voice not with my ears but in the depths of my mind. "It's time to come home, Jake. Time to rejoin the dance." I ran again, but I know now that it's futile. They'll always find me. Always. So I'm writing this as a warning. To you, whoever you are, reading these words. The world you think you know, the reality you take for granted, it's all a thin veneer. Underneath is something vast and dark and hungry. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, if you stumble into the wrong place at the wrong time, that darkness reaches out and pulls you in. If you're planning a trip to Iceland or anywhere, really, be careful. Pay attention to the shadows, to the spaces between what you think you see. And if you find a quaint little cabin off the beaten path, with a view of a pristine lake and the promise of northern lights dancing in the sky, run. Run, and don't look back. Because the hidden people are always watching, always waiting, and once you've caught their attention, once you've become part of their cosmic dance, there's no escaping. Not really. As for me, I don't know how much longer I can keep running, how much longer I can resist their call. Part of me, a growing part, wants to give in, to let go of this mundane reality and embrace the terrifying wonders they offer. To be reunited with Olga, or whatever Olga has become, in the shadowy realms beyond our world. Maybe that's what'll happen. Maybe one day soon, I'll vanish without a trace, swallowed up by the spaces between realities. Or maybe I'll find a way to truly banish them, to seal the breach between worlds once and for all. But I doubt it. Some dances, once begun, can never truly end. They just go on, echoing through the vast, uncaring cosmos for all eternity. So, if you see a tall, thin figure out of the corner of your eye, moving in ways that should be impossible, if you hear whispers in a language that makes your brain itch, if you feel the weight of ancient, hungry gazes upon you, remember my story. Remember what happened to Olga and me in that cabin by Hvittervatn. And whatever you do, don't answer when they call your name. Because they will call. They're calling me right now as I write these final words, calling me home to the dance of shadows, and God help me, I think I'm finally ready to answer. I rent a 2-bedroom apartment in the city and have been using the spare room to host Airbnb guests for the past 6 months or so. It's technically not allowed by my body corporate, but I figure what they don't know can't hurt them. Plus, it's nice to have the extra cash when you're a broke college student like me. I've definitely met some weird people through Airbnb since I started doing it. There was the man who insisted I clap 3 times each time I entered the apartment. The woman who left all these takeaway containers of weird, rotting meat when she left, and the elderly lady who tried to get me to marry her grandson back in Russia. But I think my current guest might be the strangest. I think she might be a mermaid. Before you ask, I don't mean I think she's a full-time mermaid. I've seen her walking. I've seen her legs. I'm not an idiot. I just think that maybe it's something she becomes or transforms into. Maybe when she's in water? I don't know. I sound crazy even writing it. I got a message a few weeks back, letting me know the room was going to be booked out for a full week. I was excited as this meant less sheet washing for me to do, and I could pretty much chill for that entire time. I received a few questions from the girl who was booking it, but they were pretty normal things. How far was I from the city? What was the public transport like? Did I have a bath? She arrived yesterday morning and everything was good. She was a gorgeous 30-something with this beautiful flowing hair. Like, too beautiful. Like she's in a Pantene commercial. Beautiful. Whatever, hair jealousy aside, she was really nice and lovely. She was from Italy and didn't speak a lot of English, so I felt kind of awkward trying to explain things. She had a small suitcase with her, and I showed her to her room before giving her a tour of the house. She seemed happy with everything and said she was going to have a quick bath to wash the plane off her, so I went into my room and did some studying. 20 minutes later, I heard her leaving the bathroom, which was a relief as I really needed to pee. I went in, and that's when I saw the first weird thing. I was sat on the toilet when I noticed these almost see-through leaf-looking things on the floor next to the bath. I picked one up, and it was super lightweight, kind of like an insect wing. Plus, it had this beautiful, multicolored shimmer to it. I figured it must have been something in her clothes that had fallen out when she'd gotten undressed, and scooped the remainder of them up and popped them in the bin. She spent the morning in her room. I heard her pottering around in there. She was probably unpacking her suitcase since she was going to be here for a week. Then, around lunchtime, I hear her go into the bathroom and turn on the bath again. Okay, sure, maybe she's just rinsing something off. Nope, she runs the water for ages enough to fill up the tub and take another bath. Whatever, some people just want to have a bath to relax after the one to clean. I get it. I headed out in the afternoon, and she was still in the bath. She'd been in there for at least 2 hours, but whatever. I figure I'll go get dinner with a friend and then she'll be out when I get back. I get back from dinner and she's in the living room eating sushi. I say hi, then head into my room to drop my bag off. When I come out, she's putting the packaging in the bin, and then she heads back into the bathroom, closes the door, and I hear the bath running again. At this point, I'm just so shocked and angry because, like, she's using so much water, and that's just rude. I wish I were one of those people who was good with confrontation, because I would tell her it's not cool. But then she doesn't seem to speak much English, and I don't want her to give me a bad review. Anyway, I went to bed early because I had an exam the next morning. When I woke up, she'd gone out for the day. There was more sushi packaging in the bin. Seriously, who eats sushi for breakfast? And those weird scale things were in the bathroom again. I head off to my exam, and then when I get home in the evening, the bathroom door is closed and I can hear her splashing around in the bath. Well, not really splashing, but you know those bathwater sounds that kind of echo around? Those. And then, and this is where things get kind of really bizarre, she starts singing. She has this heavenly kind of soulful voice, and I get up and walk over to the bathroom door to hear it better. But it's weird because, it felt like I wasn't in control of my body, like I was being compelled to get closer to the sound, or whatever. I don't even know, it was weird. She stops, and then I'm just sort of standing there with my ear against the door, looking like an idiot, so I just grab my bag and head out of the apartment. And now I'm sitting in a 24-hour coffee shop writing this up, and I'm not really sure what to do from here. What do you guys think I should do? Am I just totally overthinking all of this? Please, any suggestion would be greatly appreciated. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the responses I got on my last post. I've done some reading into sirens, and it seems that you guys might be onto something. I've taken your advice and bought some industrial-grade earplugs that I've now started wearing around the house, which makes me feel a bit ridiculous, but I figured if they were going to keep me from drowning, then I was happy to give them a shot. I know a lot of you have said I should just get away from my place while she's here, but I have exams on right now, so I can't really do that. I don't really feel comfortable taking a photo of her or setting up a hidden camera in my bathroom. That's just a bit too creepy. But I did manage to get a pic of some of the scale things I mentioned in the last post. They look pretty silver here, but they are more translucent in person. For some reason, I can't seem to get my phone camera to show them how they really look. It's super weird. Anyway, back to my mystery guest. Yesterday was pretty uneventful. The woman's name is Aria, by the way, so I'm going to start referring to her by name. Aria was out all day yesterday, and then I went out last night, so we didn't cross paths. There were more scales in the bathroom, but that's about it. Today, however, was super weird. I had my friend Ben over so that I could take my mind off my guest a bit, and so that I could maybe stop procrastinating and study a little. He's doing the same degree as me, and we have an exam coming up. Aria was in the lounge room, so he and I sat in my room, and I explained to him the situation as best I could. He looked at me a little strangely when I insisted he wear the pair of earplugs I gave him, but other than that, he sort of just shrugged it off. That's the good thing about Ben, he's super chill. He kept fiddling with the earplugs in his ears over lunch, saying they were uncomfortable. We'd been eating in my room, and once we were done, he got up to take the dirty plates out into the kitchen. He'd been out there for quite a while, so I called out to him to let him know he didn't need to wash them up. Just sit them next to the sink and I'd wash them later. I took an earplug out to hear his response, and that's when I heard the water sloshing sounds coming from the bathroom and Aria's voice as she sung in that weirdly hypnotic way. I cursed under my breath and ran out of my room to find Ben with his head submerged in the kitchen sink. Soapy bubbles skimmed his ears, and bits of food were stuck to his neck. His earplugs sat abandoned next to the sink. I was running on shock and instinct. I pulled him out of the water and lay him down on the kitchen floor, tilting him on his side as I'd seen people do before in movies. I was yelling his name and slapping his face as tears began to well in the corners of my eyes. I had no idea what I was doing. I ran back into my room to grab my phone to call an ambulance, and when I got back, he was coughing and spluttering. I swear, I've never been so happy to see someone throwing up on my kitchen floor. I asked him if he was all right, but he didn't seem to hear me. He stood shakily to his feet, and I saw that his eyes were kind of glazed over, like he was sleepwalking or something. He walked back to the kitchen sink, and in that moment, I knew he was going to try to drown himself again. I jumped on his back and scrambled to get the earplugs into his ears, dropping one on the ground in my panicked state. Quickly, I yanked the remaining plug from my ear and inserted it into his. 2 seconds later, as he was ducking his neck to lower it into the water, he froze. What? His eyes were wide, confused, like he'd just awoken somewhere unfamiliar. Then he started coughing. The coughing fit lasted a good 10 minutes before he was able to speak. When he did, he told me he'd taken the earplugs out because they were uncomfortable. He said the last thing he remembered was hearing a beautiful voice singing, and then he woke up 2 inches from the dishwater, with my arms laced around his neck, dangling like a baby monkey. Once he'd recovered enough, he said he was going to head home to have an early night before the exam tomorrow. It should be illegal to have exams on a Saturday, just saying. I'll be surprised if he's able to sleep, 'cause I know I sure won't be sleeping tonight. I guess it might be a bit easier when you're not sharing an apartment with someone who's clearly capable of having some weird kind of power over people, though. I've been hiding out in my room with earplugs in since Ben left, but honestly, I don't think Aria's singing has that strong an effect on me, at least not compared to what happened to Ben. Some of you mentioned that sirens are able to hold great power over men, but not so much women, and maybe it could be something to do with that. Either way, though, I'm still creeped out. I'm also scared because I think she knows that I know about what she is. Something about the looks she's given me since that first time I heard her singing just gives me the shivers. She seems too calm, like she's thinking of doing something about it, but then that could just me being super paranoid. Either way, I'm not going to have any more friends over until she leaves. She checks out on Sunday morning, so I'll make my final post after that if anything further happens. Wish me luck for my final exam and for avoiding being drowned by a sea demon. Last week, I was skeptical of the whole paranormal mythical creature thing, but after what happened on Saturday, I can honestly say I'm a believer. Friday, I stayed out of the house most of the day, studying at uni. I just felt more comfortable being there than being in my apartment with Aria around. I came back in the evening and surprise, surprise, the bathroom door was closed and I could hear her splashing around in the bath. I kind of overslept a bit on Saturday morning and ran straight out of the house to get to my exam on time. Anyway, that's just a bit of a rundown to catch you up to Saturday afternoon, when the weirdest thing I've ever experienced happened. Aria was out on the balcony, lounging on a chair, reading a book. I'd seen her like this when I went out to get a glass of water from the kitchen, before heading back into my room. I was on my laptop, aimlessly scrolling through Facebook, relishing in the fact that I had no more exams, when I heard it. It was a shrill scream that sounded kind of like the noise a cat makes when you accidentally stand on its tail, except not. There was an echo to it that sent chills down my spine. I sat bolt upright and my laptop beside me. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I call the police? Should I go out there? Was I going to be one of those dumb girls in the horror film who goes to check on the noise and then gets killed? Then I heard another sound. It was like strained breathing, mixed with a high-pitched shriek. I succumbed to the tug of compassion for a living thing in need, getting up and opening my bedroom door. What I saw thrashing about on my balcony was something that will haunt me forever. That image you have in your mind of mermaids being these beautiful creatures with colorful tails, smooth skin, and flowing hair. Take that image, crumple it up, and throw it in the nearest bin. Aria was on the ground, or at least the thing wearing Aria's dress was on the ground. I approached it, stopping short so that the glass door to the balcony separated us. Its arms were covered in shimmering silver scales that reflected the light so harshly it was difficult to look at without feeling a burn behind my eyes. At the end of the arms were webbed fingers, each with a sharp claw at the tip. Its tail, if you could call it that, began below its waist, and looked like two legs crudely forged together with the heels touching. It was as if the skin had been melted and fused together to resemble a ballet turnout. Its face had large cracks across it, which opened up further, oozing small trickles of blood whenever it opened its mouth to show its fangs. Beneath each eye was a series of gills which were flexing and straining to breathe, without success. Water was dripping from the plants on the upstairs neighbor's balcony, falling onto the creature's back. Comically, it was wearing Arya's red dress and necklaces, which was the only way I could tell it was her. That, and the pure human look of fear behind her eyes. The shrieking was fading, and Arya was obviously dying. I stood frozen in place as I watched her struggling. She never took her eyes from mine as she thrashed about, her tail smacking violently against the concrete. Then something clicked. I realized she needed help, and I was going to have to be the one to get her it. Before I consciously could register what I was doing, I was out on the balcony, leaning down to pick her up. Her arms were covered in a light, slippery slime, which made her difficult to lift. But I ended up managing and carried her into the bathroom as she wheezed and spluttered. I sat her in the bath and turned on the tap, running her head under the water so it would pass over her gills. I figured it should work like fish, that hopefully she could breathe if her gills were under the water. Luckily, my basic knowledge of aquatic life paid off, and as the bath filled up, she began breathing steadier. The wheezing stopped, and soon she seemed back to normal. Normal? She was still some kind of mermaid water creature with claws, but I mean, at least she could breathe. After a few minutes of silence filled only by our breathing, she grabbed the red stone hanging from a string around her neck. Stroking it delicately, she muttered something under her breath, and slowly I watched as her legs unfused and the scales on her arms melted into skin. As the gills on her face retreated into her skin, she pulled her head up from the faucet and looked at me. "You helped?" she said, weakly. "Thank you. I can't, this thing." She gestured at the red stone hanging around her neck. "This can only do this in water." I just stood there, staring wide-eyed at her. I must have looked like an idiot. But to be fair, she did just change into a legendary sea creature, and then back to human in front of me. When water touches me, it makes this. She gestured to her body with her newly reacquired arm. Come out, and then I need to be in it. I managed to get a slight smile to flicker across my face. "It's cool. I mean, everyone's different, right?" Was how I responded, or at least something similar but equally as bizarre to say to a mermaid chilling in your tub. She looked at me, puzzled. "Well, I'm going to leave you to do your thing. Let me know if I can help out." I stepped out of the bathroom, shutting the door behind me before bolting into my room and closing the door. I sat on the ground with my back to the door, trying to process what had just happened. I crawled over to my bed and collapsed. The combination of stress from my exam plus seeing a mermaid thing in the flesh must have been a bit much, as before I realized I was falling asleep, I was waking up to bright morning sunlight cascading into my room and a knock on my door. I answered it, and there stood Arya, very much human-looking, with suitcase in tow. "I'm leaving now," she said, with that matter-of-fact cadence that is sometimes used by people whose first language isn't English. I blinked at her, still adjusting to the light, brain quickly trying to process everything that had happened the day before. "Thank you again for helping." She smiled, reaching behind her neck and pulling a necklace over her head. It had a green stone attached, and she reached over my head to lower it onto my neck. "This will keep you safe when you—" She paused, glancing to the ceiling as she tried to find the word. "This will keep you safe in the ocean." I shook my head, trying to give her back the gift. "No, it's okay. Seriously, you don't have to—" "No." Her hand rested on mine. "Please keep it." I nodded at her and mumbled out a quiet thank you. She smiled at me and kissed me on the cheek, and then she was out the door. And that was it. That was the end of my week of living with a mermaid siren/human sea creature of some kind. I don't really know what to make of it all, but I'm going to try and keep this necklace on me as much as I can, particularly if I'm near the sea. In all honesty, she was actually a pretty good Airbnb guest, especially compared to some others I've had. I just hope she gives me a good review. After all, I did kind of save her life.